If everybody's ready, we'll call to order the regular meeting of the Tiverton Town Council, Monday, October 28th, 2019. And we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Jeannie?
Take roll call. Councillor Perry?
Present.
Councillor Edwards?
Present.
Councillor Clark?
Present.
Councillor DiMaderos?
Present.
President Hilton?
Present.
Councillor Cook?
Present.
Councillor Driggs?
Present.
Moving on to the consent agenda, we have a number of items. A, approval of town council minutes, September 30, 2019, special workshop meeting. B, acknowledge receipt of minutes from boards, commissions, and committees, one set from the zoning board of review, two sets from the board of canvassers, one from the planning board. C, acknowledge receipt of reports from the town treasurer, Denise Surratt, September budget and revenue reports. D, acknowledge receipt of correspondence, resolution of the Exeter West Greenwich Regional School District Committee field trip funding law. And E, approval of tax assessor abatements. Would any members like to remove an item for consideration?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Before we do that, I would like to offer to the council that the minutes from the September 30th special workshop were not in our packets, and you just got them. So if our pleasure is to wait to give everybody an opportunity to read through these, then we will. Otherwise, if people are comfortable, we'll go for it. Anna's abstaining from the issue was absent.
I'm comfortable going forward.
In that case, I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda minutes. All in favor? Opposed? The next item for the council is normally, under our existing policy, we don't have an open forum if we have executive session. We do have executive session tonight, but we do have a visitor who came hoping to speak and has signed up. So I'd like to ask the council if they're interested in waiving the policy to allow the open forum for this evening.
I'll make a motion to waive the open forum during executive session so that we can have the open forum. That's my motion.
Second.
Discussion, all in favor? Mr. Solicitor, do we have to make a motion to add the open forum to the agenda, or we can just go through it? In that case, we'll do the open forum, and Mr. Moreau?
I can't hear you, honey. I'm sorry.
It's okay, I can't hear me either. Mr. Moreau,
Yes?
you're welcome to sit at the table if that's more
Why
comfortable.
don't you sit over here?
You may sit over there.
All right.
And go right ahead.
Okay. All right. I came here before, maybe beginning of the year or something like that, and I asked for a favor. And the favor was, after 90 years old, your taxes should be frozen. I shouldn't pay any more taxes. I want to live a comfortable life the rest of the 4 or 5 years I have to live. There's not too many people live that old. And if you do something, you know, I would appreciate it, because I find it hard to make ends meet now. Everything is up in the air, and my money isn't up in the air. My money's all gone, okay? I want to stay where I am with my house, and I want to die there. And I'm not asking for too much. I've been here for 65 or 75 years. I don't know. I forgot now. And that's why I wanted to say, I want to see if you can do something for me. I have no one to turn to and no one to go to. Just my puppy, and that's it. That's all. And the dogs, you know, you have to buy pills for them. It's so expensive. So, you know, I mean, I'm telling you, it's hard to make ends meet. Now, I guess you people know it too. You know, so that's why I'm here. You know, I want to see if my taxes, and how many people in Tiverton are in the 90s, and the veterans besides that. And I lost my father in the war. I lost my brother in the war. I left the stuff in the car. I wanted to bring in the medals and all that shit. I mean, all that stuff. Excuse me.
That's okay.
Okay, and yeah, I'm lost now. And I wanted to prove to that it's so. You know, I'm not saying it. So that's the story. I want to know if this can be done.
Well, I'm not sure we can give you an answer tonight, but I think that the council could put on.
Can you speak a little louder?
Oh, sorry. I'm not sure that we can give you an answer this evening, but I do think that the council could put on.
I can't hear you.
Oh,
Want me to go down?
all right. Can you hear me now?
Huh?
Or is it you don't want to hear us?
No, I want to hear it. Yeah,
Denise, if you could explain to Mr. Moreau that we might not have an answer this evening, but certainly we can put on our agenda the opportunity to review our exemptions for seniors at a point in the future, the not too far away future, and that I'll happily put it on the council agenda for discussion.
I'll do that over there. Come on with me, we'll talk.
Okay.
All right?
Madam President, he could be, this,
I'm
if
here.
she gets his name and address, the tax assessor does have the ability to do hardships. So we could work that way for him too, it might help.
I did see him having a discussion earlier with the tax assessor, so I'm hoping those discussions are underway and the tax assessor's nodding yes. Okay. In that case, moving on, our next item is a public presentation. The town administrator will be introducing Jeffrey A. Brown with compensation planning to discuss the annual actuarial valuation of the police department pension plan.
Thank you. There's not a whole lot to add to that, at least not by me, but I did ask Mr. Brown to explain what an actuarial valuation is and why we undertake it in the context of our police pension fund. The fund has a board of trustees that meets on usually a regular basis. And we get reports from our investment manager as well as Mr. Brown on valuation and items like that. These are presentations that we typically like to share with the council, so this is the reason we're put on the agenda to put the most recent actuarial valuation before you. You have hopefully seen it in your packet, and if there are any questions, Mr. Brown is here to explain it.
Good evening. Can you hear me all right? Is this on?
Can you hear us?
I can hear you fine. So I appreciate an opportunity to present to you this evening the actuarial study for the Tiverton Police Pension Plan. Rest assured, I'm not going to go through all 19 pages. I'm just going to look at 3 or 4 pages and just point out the salient facts and items. So the valuation is performed each year to try and gauge the financial health of the police retirement plan. It's also demanded by the state. Since back 6-7 years ago, they required that all independent plans, the plans that were not under URSRI, the state plan, to provide an annual valuation so that they could judge the progress that towns and cities were making towards becoming fully funded. The target of the state under this FIP, or Financial Improvement Plan, was to see that all independent plans would be fully funded by the year 2035. So I'm going to look at some of the key numbers here and try and put everything in context. I'm willing to entertain questions as we go. I may defer my response until a spot in this, my brief presentation where it might make a little bit more sense, okay? So if we look on page 1, And this is, I'll mention that this report has been prepared along with McLeod and Associates, who is our actuarial partner for this plan. And everything has been prepared in accordance with GASB, which is the Government Accounting Standards Board. So there are standards and provisions that need to be adhered to in developing these numbers. So on page 1, you'll see that as of 7/1/19, and that is the first day of the current plan year, the plan operates on a fiscal year basis, and what we do is to take a snapshot of where things are on the first day of the plan year. So you'll see on July 1/19, the actuarial accrued liability is $19,331,000 and change, and the value of assets is $13,182,000.
This is page 1?
This is on page 1.
Oh, I'm sorry, gotcha, sorry, yes.
So the actuarial value of assets, is a fact. That number is derived from the reports that Washington Trust provided, your financial advisor for this plan. Not to have this come out wrong, but the actuarial accrued liability is somewhat of a fiction. It's a fabricated number based on 4 factors. So we have to develop this actuarial liability so that you have a way of trying to gauge the financial health of this plan. The liabilities are based on 4 items, as I mentioned. One is the census. So we know what the current compensation is for the officers who are active. We know what the retirement benefits are for those in pay status. We next have an interest assumption. The plan is using a 7.5% assumed rate of return. When we assumed responsibility for this plan some 10, 11 years ago, we were using a 7% rate of return. Back 7 years ago or so, when the state mandated that all independent plans engage in a funding improvement plan, many of the other cities and towns were using a 7.5% and 8% rate of return. The town said, you can't use more than 7.5. Appreciate that the higher the interest rate that you use, the lower your liabilities are going to be. The lower your interest rate, the higher your liabilities are going to be. We were asked by the town manager at that time, the town administrator at that time, to keep Tiverton on more of a even playing field and being compared with other cities and towns, that we would then use a 7.5% rate of return. So that's why the 7.5% rate of return is being used. I'll mention that there are some members of the pension board who questioned the 7.5% rate of return, feeling that that might not be a realistic figure in today's low-interest environment. I'll have some further comments about interest sensitivity a little bit later. I'll just mention that were this a private plan, not a public plan, the interest assumptions would be dictated by IRS, and the effective rate of return for private plans is somewhere between 5.25% and 5.5%. So you can appreciate that were this a private plan, the demands for contributions would be far greater than the recommended contribution that we arrive at today with this report. Okay, so I'll skip to the middle of the page, and you'll see that there are 2 numbers listed as a percentage of payroll. One is normal cost, and the other is amortization of unfunded liability.
Excuse me, one quick question.
Sure.
I hate to interrupt.
No,
I
please.
think you mentioned that there were 4
Oh, yeah,
items.
4 pack. Thank
And
you.
you got to item 2.
Yeah, so
So what's 3 and 4?
3 and 4. The third is a mortality table, and I'm going to address that a little bit later. There's a new mortality table being used for the development of these numbers, and it had I would say, a dramatic impact on the funding requirements for this plan. Thank you. I always, I teach a graduate course at Bryant, and I always forget there's something to. I appreciate someone picking me up on that.
There's a lawyer present.
And the other factor is what we'll call a salary scale, a presumption that salaries will rise at a certain interest rate, and I'll address that a little bit later too. In the middle of the page, you'll see there's a normal cost as a percentage of payroll, and an amortization of unfunded liability. So normal cost is just what it's going to cost to provide the pensions that are being earned by those people currently employed. So it's what you need to fund the benefits earned this year. The unfunded amortized liability, unfunded liability is the shortfall between the assets and the liabilities and amortizing those over time. I'll explain that a little bit further, okay? Last year, the plan earned between July 1 of 18 and 6/30/19, it earned 6.8%, a little bit less than the 7.5% assumed rate of return, and that shortfall is going to be amortized over 15 years. We're going to see that in a sec. Okay? Page 2. It just mentions that we're using a new mortality table for public service employees. When that was released by IRS, that had a dramatic impact on increasing the cost of this plan. I think it might be an outlier, and I'm going to show you why in a little second. So we're going to skip on, and you just look at to see how some of these numbers are developed on page 3. I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but I'm going to show you that in 2017, there was a new actuarial table introduced. It caused the liabilities to go up by $675,000. I think that was an outlier. The IRS was probably a little bit off in coming up with that new mortality table. And the next year, you'll see mortality projection scale for 7/1/18. That actually created an actuarial gain. So there was even less liability because of that new scale that was introduced. This year, under 7/1/19 change in mortality table, again, we see a $620,000 charge. And I would not be surprised that come next year, the government realizes that, whoops, maybe we were too a little aggressive on that, and we're going to not see that kind of charge to the liabilities come next year's valuation. And I'll just call your attention to the last item in that middle where it says actuarial gain loss as of 7/1/19. There was an actuarial loss of about, let me just quickly get that number for you. Because of the investment performance, there was actually an actuarial loss of $88,000. But the salary scale that I mentioned, assuming a 3.5% increase, salaries didn't go up by 3.5%. That ends up being a credit. So the total actuarial loss, experience loss, was about $51,000. In prior years, there were members of the committee that questioned, gee, that salary scale is 3.5%. Salaries aren't going up that much. We recognize that. But it kind of tempers the fact that the investments aren't likely to earn 7.5%. So it all kind of balances, and it's all recalibrated each and every year. And the experience gain loss is amortized over 15 years. On page 4, there is a schedule that's showing how the town's plan can be fully funded by the year 2035 if the town were to adhere to a recommended contribution. The town contribution is highlighted 4 or 5 columns over, entitled Town Contribution. You'll see that there's that schedule of payments. Again, I'll just echo what I had commented earlier, that I think the recommended contribution is a little too moderate, a little too light, given the fact that it's unlikely that on a consistent, sustained basis, the plan will return a 7.5% rate of return. As I said, that question should be posed to Washington Trust, your advisors. And I'll just point out on page 18, there is a little note there about sensitivity of interest assumptions, and it notes that were a 6.5% assumption to be used as opposed to a 7.5% interest assumption, your liabilities would go up to $21,694, and I calculated that that would likely call for an annual increase in the recommended contribution of about $180,000. So just to put that in context, that might give you some guidance as you make decisions in terms of what the contribution will be to fund this plan. I
You're
would s-
talking per year?
Per year,
Each year
yes.
adding on
Right.
another?
Another
100.
180, because it would add over $2 million to the overall liabilities.
So
I-
8,000 something, 8,000 what?
And I was roughly calculating it would call for an additional $180,000 contribution a year to amortize the additional $2 million of liability. That would result from a 6.5% return as opposed to a 7.5% return. I will say that in recent years, the town has made contributions that were in excess of the recommended contribution, and kudos to the town for that. But I just wanted to try and put the recommended contribution in context. So, one shouldn't be too complacent because this chart shows that you'll be fully funded in the year 2035, because the target number may be hard to attain, assuming a 7.5% return when you don't get that rate of return on your investments. I'll now entertain any questions.
Mr. Brown, on page 8, under the assumptions, section 3 shows that we didn't use any assumed turnover. Is there a particular reason for that?
I would have to address that to our
You can get back to me too.
our
If you don't have that
actuary,
right there,
but,
that's fine.
There wasn't a turnover scale involved. You know, again, if you're assuming turnover, that would tend to reduce your recommended contribution, and again, that might temper the fact that we probably are a little bit light on the interest assumption. So they all balance one another.
Yeah,
you
it's
know.
6 of one, half dozen of the other. You make it up
Correct.
somewhere else.
You never know what the actual cost of your plan is until everyone is paid out. This is a dynamic plan. Everyone is not going to be paid out. It's constantly in flux, so that you just have some standards where you try and gauge what the overall financial health is of this plan.
I have, are you done? I'm sorry.
I had one other question, but if you
Okay,
want to
go
go,
ahead,
go for
go
it.
ahead.
I can wait.
What?
I can wait. Go ahead.
Okay. So I just remember when I was in the Budget Committee and heard about this FIP for the first time, and we were all told it would end by 2020, or at least the initial program went through 2020.
Well, the FIP, as we understood it, was to require that cities and towns have their plans funded by 2035. And when I went to the State House to testify back 6-7 years ago, I'll just comment that this plan was in far better shape than all the other plans I heard that day. And so they would never get fully funded at 2035. But 2020 would be unrealistic to try and make up that significant shortfall in a very short period of time.
And then, so my other question is this assumption of 7.5, which doesn't seem to be attainable.
It doesn't, but
yeah.
if the town is looking to, well, how's the Tiverton plan doing versus Coventry or Barrington? And if they're using 7.5% and we were to use 7, this plan would look worse in compared with those other plans. So to be on an even playing field, we were asked to use a 7.5% rate of return. I was just trying to paint a realistic picture of what that means.
Okay, and then my last, or maybe not my last, but another comment I have is a prior town councillor, Justin Katz, was on the police pension board.
Right.
And I know at that time he was very concerned with the figures, and I think was
7.5%.
very interested in getting a production of numbers of what it would actually look like if it was between, let's say, 6.5% and 4%,
I've given-
or even 0, just what the actual hard
Correct.
numbers.
So
And
you
can
have-
we get any of those
So you
kind
have
of?
a number on page 18, as I pointed out, of where would we be if there, a 6.5% interest assumption were utilized.
Hold on.
So it's right at the top of the page. Sensitivity of the net pension liability to changes in discount rate. Top of page 18.
Hold on.
So your total liabilities would be at 21,694, as opposed to 19,331. So you're looking at an increase of 2.3 million. As I said,
Okay, so I'm on
amortized,
page 18 now. Say it again. Okay, I see. Here it is.
see that number, 1%
yeah.
decrease
Yep.
was 6.5%, and then under that it says 21,694. So that would be the total liability figure. We're a 6.5%
At
interest rate.
6.5. What about at 4?
Well, I don't have that number for you, but you could,
It would go drastically up.
you're probably looking at another $3 million, 3 to 3.5 million, shooting from the hip, over and above that.
Yeah, I was just going to,
If I may jump in on that, I think Mr. Brown just earlier mentioned that we need to ask Washington Trust for its perspective on this as to what is the
Yeah.
most reasonable rate to use at this point in time, and I think this goes back to that, if I'm not mistaken. At least, I wouldn't want to pick the rate.
well, I don't,
Well, the 7.5% interest assumption is somewhat a political decision.
it's
recognize that.
partly a political decision, but it's partly because it's how we benchmark ourselves against other plans.
Right,
So
right. Well, so it's
there's no way,
political, and
there's
you
no
wanna
way
be
for
on
us
the same
to,
playing field as the other cities in town.
yeah, there's no way for us to know how our plan is doing if we don't have a benchmark against which to measure it. And if every other municipality in the state of Rhode Island is using 7.5%, it makes no sense for us to change the benchmark, because then we can't compare ourselves to the other municipalities and see
Except
how we're doing.
Our
Now-
ultimate responsibility is just for our town to pay the police, not to see how
Right, that's what-
Kingston's paying the police, so
But that's
what-
why I made the comments about, and that's why we provided a what if, should the actual rate of return be 6.5 versus 7.5. But you want to be on an even playing field when the state's looking at the FIPS for the various municipalities.
I mean, the S&P 500 was up, it's up 21 and change percent this year alone. What if we just moved all of our investment allocation to the S&P 500 and got 21%?
But
What is that going to do to the numbers? You know,
I
this
think
is,
that we need to talk to Washington Trust. I don't know where our investments are.
well, I can tell you it's pretty high equity allocation the last time I saw them. It's like 80-something% equity allocation. That's a side
But
conversation.
S&P 500s or
No, the allocation for this pension.
S&P 500s, or what kind of equity allocation?
Washington Trust can get us the breakdown, but
Right.
I mean, from a fiduciary standpoint, I can tell you my opinion, and somebody who works in the industry, our allocation in our pension plan is a little too aggressive. But again, I don't want to go off topic here because we're talking about the actuarial valuations, and I think we should certainly bring in Washington Trust to have those conversations. But Mr. Brown, the other question I had for you was on page. Where is it? Page 10. Talks about disbursements. Obviously, we see what the benefits paid are. But under administrative expenses, there's just that $10,800 number there. Are we not accounting for investment advisor expenses or anything else associated with the plan?
That probably comes out of the investment return, because so,
Okay.
yeah, when we weren't, I don't think we were given a recap of what that is, so.
Gotcha.
So that's
That makes sense.
that's it.
Thank you.
Mr. Brown, are the majority of the towns still using the 7.5 as benchmark?
Yeah, because, the state said there's a 7.5% cap, so they're all gonna
Right,
walk up to the cap. I just wanted to
right.
put everything in a realistic context.
correct. I understand that. I just was curious if.
Yes.
if
Oh, I
other
don't deal with
communities
the
are
other,
peeling
with
away
many of
from
the
this
other cities and towns. We
benchmark.
have 2 other public plans that we manage in Rhode Island, but they are using a 7.5% rate of return.
Well, I guess I have a hard time with 7.5% considering that it's all fabricated. Everyone's like, it's like
Well, you need a
made up
standard to judge.
numbers. And the sustainability of this, taking from the present to give to the future, and it's so, I don't know, to take more money from what the town needs now for something in the future that we don't even know how stable it is. The pensions are just not that stable.
Right.
And it's all
Well-
made up numbers with percentages that someone made up, right?
Well, they're not,
Well, they're made up numbers.
They're somewhat, you're making assumptions. I think the assumptions are, for the most part, valid. They work in concert with one another, but I think that the 7.5% is a little too aggressive. I think Councilor Edwards would agree with me, given long-term investment returns, you know. So,
And just to put in context, I mean, it's fascinating to me that for the last 10 years, our contribution, the net contribution has actually been under the 700,000. I think it's 687,000 or something per year, the
well,
town.
it was the last 3 or
But-
4 years, the town stepped up to put in just a flat 700,000, even though the recommended contribution was
Correct.
something.
But what we're
less than
looking
that.
at now is every year it going up by the sum you said. So just so everybody understands.
It's going to go up.
By the year 2037, our contribution would be $1,346,278. I mean, sorry, $1,346,278.
Right, in the year, in 36.
Yeah. Yep.
If I could just jump in here for Councilor Driggs, I mean, I
Yeah.
think what Mr. Brown is pointing out is that prior to the last 3 years, the town has finally stepped up in the last 3 years and put in the recommended contribution. But before that, the town has decided to kick the can down the road. And what you're seeing here are the fruits of those efforts, because had the town contributed what the town was supposed to have contributed all those years before, we might not be looking at numbers as high as they are
We
today.
weren't below that, though. We were not far below. We were like 687,
You're-
690. That's close to 700, and that was net, so I don't know.
I mean, the table that you're referring to here, this table hasn't changed as far as the contributions as long as I've been involved, even going back to when I first got on the council in 2016. These numbers are going to continue to go up, and there's numerous factors that go into it. It's not just something that can be boiled down to, hey, what's the rate of return we're using? And as you know, Mr. Brown has pointed out here tonight, you have to make assumptions in order to determine how the plan is doing. The bottom line for me when I look at this number is that our percentage funded status has decreased, and that's a result of changes to mortality tables and some of the assumptions that we're required to make. And the only way to get it back in the line is for the town to make contributions that are going to go up to the annual recommended contribution, which we don't have to do, but we should do. And the reason why we don't have to do it is because we're a municipality, we are not subject to the Employee Retirement and Income Security Act. If we were, we wouldn't be in this position today.
Madam President, could I interject? I just want to point out that there is a Board of Trustees that is supposed to address a lot of these issues. And rather than doing what the Board of Trustees should be doing, I think what you may want to focus on is, okay, what we hear here today. Does that suggest that the council wants to send a message to the Board of Trustees as to, we want you to take another good look at what assumptions we use with an eye to making sure that we don't, in a few years from now, are way under where we should be, and work with the financial advisor to arrive at, or to reevaluate what we should be using as an assumption, I think. I think that would be a good direction to give to the
I
Board of
guess what you're
Trustees.
hearing from me is that I think one of the things they need to look at is we seem to be basing the rate of return on something that, so we look competitive with other towns that has no relevance.
And
to
you're
not to
taking
be
that out of
competitive.
context.
It's a
Well,
methodology.
But
Fine. That it's
my-
in consort with.
Yeah, if I could just, I mean,
And if it's not realistic, we need to We need to deal with reality.
My understanding was with this FIP that the state was going to tie reimbursements to how closely a town would adhere to a funding improvement plan and show that they're adequately funded. So for the town to receive certain revenues from the state, it would be important to show that you're on track to be fully funded, and to start the race 2 steps back because you're going to use a lower rate of return would put Tiverton into disadvantage. I do think it's appropriate, and I made the comments, that you understand the context of these numbers and that there are probably too conservative, and that one shouldn't be complacent because you're on track to be fully funded, because that might not be adequate. That's all. I mean, you need to have standards to gauge the financial health of this plan. We're just the messenger, so don't shoot us.
I think the other thing that I'd be curious, I mean, on page 1, the accrued liability and the accrued value of the assets, that percentage that's based on a snapshot of that day.
All we're doing is
So-
taking a snapshot on 7/1,
on
precisely.
7/1. So, whether or not we're really at 68.2 or not is a little hard to tell, because I don't remember what the market did on July 1st. So I think that, I think I'd also be curious for a better number in terms of the percentage of our funding. It's hard because you've got an equity portfolio, but nonetheless, that's just a one-day snapshot. We don't really.
Madam President, one other thing, I think that it arises out of the discussion we've had here today, and just to piggyback off the administrator's comments, perhaps we as a council should put an agenda item on for future discussion to talk about the composition of the pension board, because quite frankly, I don't think the town's in a position right now with the right members of the board and the right structure. And this is an issue that has come up before, but maybe I can get that on for a future agenda so we can talk about who should be a member of that board and how it should be structured, so that we have people who are, in the industry making those decisions.
I think that's fine, and a discussion about our expectation from what we'd like to hear on a somewhat regular basis from the pension board would probably be helpful. So why don't we?
Yeah, and perhaps a crash course on how pensions work too, for everybody, so everybody at home understands as well, because there's a lot of numbers that go into it.
Do we have any other questions or comments from Mr. Brown? Please, thank you very much for coming this evening.
I thank you, my pleasure.
Thank you.
We have no public advertised hearings, nor do we have any responsibilities to the Board of Licensing tonight, which moves us on to appointments and resignations. Chief Jones is here to discuss with us the appointment of reserve police officers. Chief Jones?
Good evening. It's for the council's consideration, based on my recommendation, that we appoint Lieutenant Scott Bullia, who served 20 years with the police department and has recently retired as of August of 2019, and Corporal Joseph Wisbicki, who did 32 years with the police department and retired as of October of this month, to reserve police officers. And just for the council's explanation, how reserve police officers work is they're not employees of the town. They're based on an as-needed basis, and we use them to supplement the full-time force for reserves and the casino detail. So they're paid directly by the vendor. And I also believe as part of your backup, they signed waivers, so they understand that they're not part of the union, and they serve at my pleasure and through the pleasure of the town.
And Chief, this will bring your reserve officer force up to how many?
Approximately 6.
6.
And is that adequate? Is that what you're looking for?
Yes, ma'am.
A total of 6?
Yes, ma'am.
You wouldn't want more? I thought at some point,
Well, what we normally do with the full-time, because we have several of the reserve officers that were not Tiverton police officers or retired Tiverton police officers. Some of them, actually, one from Portsmouth, one from Middletown, one from Bristol. Going forward, as officers retire, given that we have such a young force, I don't anticipate any retirements anytime soon. So these were the last of the officers eligible to retire that I would recommend that we make reserves.
I'd like to make a motion to appoint Lieutenant Scott Bowyer and Corporal Joseph Wabitsky, I always have a problem with that last name, to the reserve police officers per Chief Jones' request.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Thank you.
Next up is a Budget Committee appointment. That's an 11-member board with 4-year terms. There's one vacancy. Madam
I have a
Clerk?
question. Who quit, or why do we have this vacancy?
We have this vacancy because I believe it was Justin LaCroix.
I thought we had put, who did we
No,
replace
we
Mike
had to.
Dakotas with?
Jeff Karen.
Jeff Karen?
Jeff.
And then we just put,
But we did not put, there was a higher vote getter that would have taken the place, but he sent us
Okay.
an email. We spoke to him, and he chooses not to take that at this time.
okay, that's what I'm,
Okay, so we've
So
moved
Mr.
down
Cody
to
is
the
the
next
next
So
person.
Mr. Cody's
Yes.
gonna, okay. That's what confused me, because I know that Alex was not the,
Right, it
next
was a Mr.
yeah.
Acree.
I thought he
Acree.
was on though.
But I do have an email from him that
Okay.
he is not wishing to take it at this time.
Sherry hasn't, yeah, I know. But she should be quitting.
In that case, do I have a motion to appoint Alexander Cody to the Budget Committee
I'll make that
for
motion.
the remaining vacancy?
Second. Do we have to waive policy, though?
I don't-
No, because
It's not a
it's-
board or commission.
Okay.
This is an elected.
This has to be done
vacancy.
by Alex.
It automatically moves up. Any other discussion? No? All in favor? Madam Clerk, do you take care of swearing in the new Budget Committee member?
I will.
Next up is the acknowledgment of the resignation of Solicitor Ciccione. You have in your packets a letter submitted by Mr. Ciccione dated October 21st, 2019, submitting his resignation to the town council. But of course, as a professional, he is offered and is fully prepared to serve the town and the council until a replacement has been selected. So do I,
Do we have to have a motion to acknowledge this?
No, you don't. Madam Chair, can I just also say on behalf of Solicitor Ciccione, he can't be here tonight because he's out of state. It was a prearranged absence, not having to do with any of the circumstances surrounding the town. And I know he's appreciated the opportunity to serve the people of Tiverton.
thank you, Mr. Feidish. On to bids and requests for proposals. DPW Director Rogers requests permission to advertise and hire one new truck driver laborer according to the attached job description. Good evening, Mr. Rogers.
Good evening. Yes, thank you. As explained in the packet, John Teasdale retired October 1st, so we would like to hire someone to replace him.
Questions, comments?
Madam President,
Motion?
make a motion to authorize the director to advertise for the position.
Second.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Thank you.
Tax Assessor Robert requests award of bid contract to Northeast Revaluation Group for 2020 full revaluation.
Good evening. As you may know, under Rhode Island State statute, the town is obligated to conduct a revaluation once every 3 years. Every 9 years, we have to conduct a full revaluation. That's the revaluation that went out to bid with town council approval approximately a month and a half ago. We received 3 bids. After reviewing all of the bids and taking a look at the low bid and the most qualified, I do recommend that we award the contract to Northeast Revaluation Group.
Madam President,
Yes, sir.
just just have one question for the assessor. Sorry, let's pick a side of the poll.
Hey, John.
So if let's say we award the bid to Northeast Revaluation Group, is that going to change some of the web functionality that we have through Vision today?
It is.
Okay. And you're
Right.
prepared to?
Right. So
Facilitate
Vision, they
that.
have their own web presence and their own portal. We're going to be switching it over to Northeast.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for, in that case, do I have a motion?
Oh, sorry. I thought you were going for it. You're the vice chair, so I figured you'd jump on it.
Actually, Donna's already.
Donna's ready.
All right. I don't do it often, so don't interrupt.
All right, go ahead.
Clock's ticking.
All right. Make a motion to approve the request award for bid contract to Northeast Revaluation Group for 2020 full revaluation, and I believe it's for $316,600.
Second.
Motion second. Any other questions, comments? All in favor?
Thank you.
Moving on to general business. Planning Board Chair Susan Gill, the proposed recommendations for the temporary sign ordinance. And there's also a memo in your packet that Solicitor Ciccione put together earlier that outlines the difficulty around this topic, around this whole temporary sign thing, based on a recent Supreme Court decision. So, and I also know that Solicitor Fabish is prepared to help us discuss this evening as well. So, Susan, do you want to come up?
Hi. Good evening. I don't know where you want to start with this. I guess we were tasked to address the temporary sign ordinance last spring or summer. So I know we received the several documents, the one that I guess Mr. Coulter had done, which addressed specifically the temporary sign ordinance. Then Mr. Ciccione had submitted, or through the councillors, of one that addressed the entire sign ordinance, and also this model, Institute for Justice Model Sign Code, which I went through. And so the planning board looked at all that. We also reached out to the zoning official and the building official to get any feedback from them once they were provided with all these documents. It was kind of unclear for a while whether we were looking at the whole ordinance or the temporary sign. When it was clarified that it was just temporary sign ordinance, that's where we chose to address it. So what we decided, what we went through, I don't know how you want to deal with it now, but tried to narrow it down. So in order to focus our discussion, and rather than trying to rewrite the existing ordinance because it kind of weaves and bends throughout, tried to get the salient points and then bring that to the council for you then to, through the public hearing process, figure out which parameters you wanted to go with. And then I figured it could be put into the proper legal jargon and delete any items that you wanted to then delete from the existing ordinance. So what we went through is we came up with a new definition for temporary signs and a couple of guiding principles that the building or zoning official or designee would basically be the enforcement officer, and then guidelines for permitted signs and non-permitted signs. So the areas that we focused on were the size, the duration that a sign could be up, who would be the enforcement agency, and looking at public safety as factors. It kind of came out through the discussions that we had was that content wasn't really something that we could address, that the idea was you had to be able to look at a sign in and of itself regardless of what was on it, so that would kind of make it easier whether it was election or for yard sales or auctions or fundraising events. And then the other area that we didn't address was the total number of signs, because we kind of discussed that for a while and it just it was just kind of a difficult area, and I don't know if through the public hearing process, if that's something that you want to address, is the number of signs. So I don't know, those are the basic things. That's why we came up with, like, for temporary signs, the 6 square feet, the 14 days. Felt that it would be important to have them put the date of the sign that it went up so that you'd know what the 14 days were allowed. And that way, whether the zoning building official or DPW or anybody saw that once they had basically expired, from those 14 days, then they could be removed if the people that had put them up hadn't removed them, so that we wouldn't end up with a lot of extra signage throughout the town. It was looked at for the 42 inches above grade as like more addressing public safety. I guess that would be like the sight line if you're near an intersection or trying to turn a corner. The one thing that seemed to be the one that everybody agreed on was that no posting of temporary signs on utility poles, traffic medians, or along corridors or sidewalks to try it so you don't end up with just basically a lot of litter on public areas. And then what else? There was just, I guess one of the last items under the general provisions included, if you wanted to do some enforcement of it, would be the $20 per day if people were, I guess, failing to comply, if they had infractions. And that's kind of where we decided to go with it. The other things are A-frame signs and residential, like advertising for sale signs for properties. They would have some special allowances to do extra. But I guess that's kind of what we came up with. To try and keep it more generic, to simplify it, we found reading through the existing sign ordinance is just pretty messy. It's pretty messy. So we went for simplifying it and clarifying the points that we thought were important enough for the council to consider at the public hearing.
So I noticed, Mr. Coulter's said nonprofit, for instance, not exceeding 20 square feet, but you have it up to 6 square feet, so that would be 36?
No.
6
The
feet?
temporary signs, 6 square feet would be like a 2 by 3 foot sign. And that's probably
Oh,
what the
6
standard
square
is.
feet is what you said,
6
not
square
6 on
feet.
each side. Sorry,
Right,
I misread
right.
that.
We're going with square
So
feet.
you're going much smaller.
Yeah, and that's probably what you see out there, I guess. Probably, the election signs or the standard sign. I would guess somewhere if they're 18 by 24 or 2 by 3 foot signs. That's probably pretty much what's out there now.
Could I ask Solicitor Fabish to weigh in on this too? Because this Supreme Court decision makes this all really sort of complicated and messy. So it might be helpful to get his input too before we continue the discussion.
So, the memo that Solicitor Chione wrote is apt. And basically, the most important takeaway from that is that municipalities and government entities in general are no longer permitted to distinguish between types of signs. If you have to read the sign and understand what it's relating to, it's likely a content-based restriction. And under the Reed versus Gilbert opinion, municipalities are generally no longer allowed to do that. There are some caveats that are built into the decision relating to directional signs. There is an entire concurrence authored by Justice Alito that talks about what is left to municipalities and other government entities to regulate. And generally that relates to the types of restrictions that we've already talked about and that the planning board, I think, tried to focus on, being restrictions on placement on municipal property, restrictions related to safety in traffic control and along pedestrian corridors, but generally distinguishing between, for example, nonprofit events and political signs and commercial signs, even with what's generally in the past been considered a commercial speech doctrine that's a little bit more permissive of regulation of speech. In light of the Reed decision and in light of relatively few appeals court decisions, having had the opportunity to interpret the Reed decision, the ability of municipalities to make those sorts of distinctions, and certainly to regulate on the basis of aesthetics, is in serious question, if not eliminated at this point.
Is what? I'm sorry.
Is either in doubt or non-existent at this point.
Did Reed touch at all the size of the sign?
Don't believe Reed itself did. There are lower court opinions that have looked at the size of signs, and the problem is, in light of Reed, most of the lower court opinions have applied strict scrutiny and simply placed that burden on whoever it is that's trying to regulate the speech, and most of the municipalities simply haven't been able to satisfy that high burden, right? When we talk about regulating speech, the courts will apply what's called strict scrutiny generally, which is the highest level of scrutiny that a court will take to examine an issue of speech. So they're looking, first of all, it's important to understand that the municipality or whoever it is that's trying to regulate has to have a compelling state interest. They have to use the least restrictive means, meaning arguably, if the sign could be 1 foot larger, then it's unconstitutional. Right? If the municipality could achieve its objective by allowing a sign that's 1 foot larger, it hasn't applied the least restrictive means. Right? So it's a very, very high burden that has to be satisfied in order to regulate this type of speech under the Reed decision.
So I will say this, since this whole temporary sign ordinance came up, as I drive around town, I've made a note of the signs. And there's everything. So just on the size issue alone, which, you know, when you think about it and you're thinking about political signs, or you're thinking about those signs that advertise taking junk away or mattresses for sale and all that other sort of stuff, right? You say, oh, well, you know, if the signs are restricted, you definitely don't want those to be, you know, you don't want these huge signs. But then on the other hand, for example, when I was driving around for Pardon Gray Day, right? The sign for Pardon Gray was big. And then there was a big, huge banner that was, a big, huge cloth banner that was attached at Bogomarsh Park. Like, so this is really very sort of complicated. And it seems to me that until the courts keep going through this process and they come up with some better you know, history of decisions that help the municipalities. On the one hand, there's a part of me that says, okay, well, we could adopt something and it's still probably going to be illegal or unconstitutional, but it'll be a little better than what it is. But then I ask myself, will it really? Because I look at historically some of the signs that we have around town, especially for special events and charities that we support, and think we're going to make it so these existing signs for things like Tiverton Days or Pardon Gray, or they're all going to be made illegal, and nobody means to, but you know, on the other hand, we could end up with a giant, huge banner that says, you know, we buy used mattresses. I mean, it's kind of really difficult here to go forward. So point of what I'm trying to say is there's a part of me that says, well, the planning board's done some work. You know, we could adopt that knowing that it may not be constitutional, it may be challenged. On the other hand, there's a part of me that says, you know, we're going to spend the time and the expense to have a public hearing and potentially pass this ordinance and have it codified, and it could be challenged anyway, and it might be actually worse than what we have because we're adding restrictions on that are going to affect entities and organizations that we never meant to affect. So
I think under Reed, essentially, one of the policy decisions that the council needs to make now, and really, if you look at the sign ordinances across Rhode Island, right, they're all unconstitutional under Reed. Most sign ordinances predate this decision, and the reality is most litigants haven't bothered to bring an action. Generally, municipalities that are litigation averse and risk averse are going to try to ensure that their enforcement priorities don't trigger the sort of response that would cause a speaker to bring a suit, so that somebody would have to make an affirmative decision to target your particular municipality with a declaratory judgment action saying, I'm in fear of enforcement by this entity, as opposed to, bringing a suit or answering a suit in response to an enforcement action. That said, I do think what the planning board has put together, and particularly with additional work, could be an improvement on what's already in place, but I think this board and this body needs to make a decision about where its regulatory priorities are and what its priorities are over the next couple months.
So our decision tonight is whether or not to go forward to advertise this as an ordinance change and have a public hearing. That's really what we need to decide tonight.
Madam President,
Yes, John?
if I might just say, I think that we would be better served utilizing our time elsewhere.
Can I ask a question?
Elsewhere, not go forward,
Ask a question.
whatever that means. I don't know what the word is.
Can I ask a question?
Sorry,
Yeah, I just
Councilor
wanted to
Driggs.
ask, is what we put together, is that considered, those parameters constitutional, or are those still considered unconstitutional?
Better, but for one thing, because it focuses only on temporary signs,
Right.
it leaves the rest of the ordinance in place. And even there, because it makes certain distinctions between types of temporary signs, which is what I had mentioned before the planning board, but I think the thought was that members of the planning board, as I understood it, wanted to try and just focus on what they interpreted their mandate to be.
Right.
I would agree with Councilor Edwards at this point. I don't know what the right word is. Is it tabling it or just not moving forward with it this time? That was the question.
I do have a question, because if I remember way back, it seems like years ago, but the whole purpose of this was the time restraint. This all came about because the signs were up there more than 2 weeks. They were up there like a couple of months. And there was a lot of discussion, and actually someone came to us and asked us to increase the time. But according to these court cases, we can't restrict time. Is that
Correct.
true?
That's correct.
So they could put them up for a month and fight us that that's okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's why,
By-
just to let the other councilors that weren't here, the main purpose of this was because we were watching signs and saying, well, this event isn't for a month and a half, why is it up there? Because according to the ordinance, it can't be. So that was the whole, I think, was the purpose of this, and someone asked us to change it because of that.
I think by sheer happenstance, that was the other meeting that I had covered for.
Right,
for
right,
Joe.
I thought so.
And so I recall what happened there, but yes, there are now at least 2 appeals court decisions that have found that the time restrictions, the temporal restrictions related to political signs are unconstitutional under READ.
Related to political, but how about event signs?
It's same analysis.
Same
really,
analysis,
right?
okay. That's what I thought.
And so, again, in directing enforcement priorities through the zoning office, that would be one of the recommendations to our enforcement officials. Don't enforce on the basis of time.
Regardless of what the policy said anyway. Okay,
But-
so that's what my question was, because I thought the whole purpose of this was that, and that's how it all came about, the change.
Or is it
But-
Mr., I'm sorry, you
But
guys-
couldn't someone come before us and ask for a request to put their signs out sooner? Didn't we discuss that?
We discussed it, but I thought it was going to be incorporated in the policy.
But I'm saying now, if we stay the way it is, couldn't somebody come before us and say, hey, can I put my signs out 3 weeks ahead of what I'm supposed to? I thought that's what we had discussed at that meeting about.
Well, the attorney just told us that they don't even have to come in front of us because it is a policy that can't be enforced.
So if a zoning official comes to the solicitor's office and says, we have an enforcement action that we'd like to bring because we believe that this particular individual is in violation of our sign ordinance, our recommendation is likely to be, again, subject to doing sufficient legal due diligence and research, our recommendation is likely to be, you cannot bring that enforcement action as it's constitutionally preempted.
So what we're saying is signs can go
Yeah, well,
up whenever people
right.
want to put signs up.
I
Really?
mean, essentially what we have is voluntary compliance here.
Well, it's like a guideline.
I mean,
It's a
that's-
guideline, really.
Right.
This is what the
That's
town would
about
like.
it. We're about all we can have right now is sort of voluntary compliance. So, so I'm going to, go ahead, Joe, did you have
So
another
why
question?
waste our time continuing this?
Yes.
So this is kind of the question tonight. Is there a consensus that we should, Jan is shaking his head no. Would you like to say something, Jan?
Obviously.
Not really, but I'm just surprised at what I hear today. I read the memo that Gio wrote, and it talks about the Reed case, which seems to say that you can't require permitting of signs for one type of sign if you don't do it for another, or vice versa, or whatever, based on content. That's very different from subjecting it to, for example, dimensional restrictions, or time. How long can it be up? I mean, as long as, there's no distinction between for which signs do you require that or not. I just think all of a sudden we have a very broad reading of Reed. Now, you just mentioned two cases, which the first time I actually heard what one case apparently says, but we ought to take a look at those, because Reed itself, at least not how it was summarized by Gio, goes that far.
Reed goes extremely far. Reed was a seismic shift in the understanding of municipal authority to regulate signs.
But does that mean that the municipal authority is gone to submit it, to subject it to dimensional restrictions, for example?
No,
What
and
is-
in fact, those types of dimensional restrictions are, in fact, among the areas that
Okay.
Justice Alito has identified
Okay.
as residual authority that's left for municipalities.
Well, that's good, I think.
But even that, take for example somebody who decides to paint the side of their house as a sign, right? Under Reed, that's not clear
Right.
as to whether municipality. And in fact, I suggest that it is clear, and municipalities generally lack the authority to make that type of regulation. So that's where we're going with this. Is it possible to devise a sign regulation, a sign ordinance that advances some municipal interests in safety, in possibly aesthetics? Probably. But even the legitimacy of regulating on the basis of aesthetics is in question. And the question becomes whether this municipality wants to incur that litigation risk and expense in order to vindicate that interest.
Well, what about public safety? We have, I think one of the most popular areas, if I'm not mistaken, is the Rotary. And the more signs you have, the more distraction you have, and there's certainly transportation officials very
Well, that's
concerned.
Absolutely, on the grounds of safety, the right is reserved. And the right to prohibit signs, blanket prohibition on any municipal or public property.
But it says right here, there are specific cases where it said you can't restrict the amount of days that they're up. Yeah.
So, what is the council's pleasure right now? Do we want to go to public advertising for this, or would we like to hold this for a while, see if there are some more cases? It may be, too, that once we hire a planner, I mean, the professional planning community is working hard on this, because they're the ones that really kind of have to deal with it, so there may be some things going on in the planning community. Joe?
I was going to say, I'd make a motion to table this till,
Would it be table or
well,
defer it?
or defer it till,
I mean, we'd like,
Table,
I
yeah.
mean, possibly bring it back someday. And to thank the planning board for the work, which means that the work that the planning board's done
It's done.
isn't necessarily moot. I mean, we can start with that, but maybe with the planner and a little more time, we could come up with something that, would be less subject to challenge.
Madam President?
Yep.
I just want to make one more comment along the lines of what the administrator said, because I've got the existing ordinance up here, and I don't see any prohibition for signs on municipal property. That is something I would be interested in discussing, but not to the extent that this ordinance was in front of us tonight.
we can do that.
We had talked about that in the past.
I think the planning board, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the planning board was sympathetic to that notion of regulation.
Right. Yeah, that was
So we
part
can
of it. I
tape-
mean, not to have it on municipal property. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was in what you guys presented, so.
Right.
But it's not in our ordinance as it sits today. And it should be.
Yeah, because we discussed that, John.
Okay, in that case, if there's consensus, do I have a motion to table this?
I made a motion.
I'll second.
All those in favor? All right.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Susan.
Mrs.
Can I
Kelly.
add something to the sign, banner and sign thing? I used to have a banner company, I still do that, but I used to do a lot of business in like Providence, Fall River, and putting up hundreds of banners. And I think if you are putting something together, you should also consider whole banners for business purposes and putting in some sort of clause that whoever puts them up be insured for liability if something happens and all of that kind of stuff.
It falls on somebody.
Because it can get very, very complicated. But, I mean, a lot of towns do use banners to promote new business districts, and it does look nice, and I think banners can be used very effectively. But I think that maybe that can all be bundled into a whole thing so that it doesn't come up again.
Okay.
And I don't want to get any business out of that. I'm trying to get out of it.
You're retiring, aren't you?
Thank you, Barbara. The next up, I'm not quite sure why this, I don't think I put this in. I thought this was Councilor DiMederos's, but it's under my name. It says Councilor Hilton approval to advertise RFP for town solicitor. Obviously, Solicitor Ciccione has submitted his resignation. But I think that this was actually Denise's item.
Well, I think I said we need to do it, but yeah. The RFP is right, this is the RFP that we used the last 2 times. I was looking at it to see if it could be tweaked, but I didn't really get any suggestions from people I asked, so it's worked in the past. So I'm sure, it was all in your packets.
Yeah, Madam President, I have one comment on the RFP that I would like to see added. The item number 13, where it says applicants are requested to provide 10 hard copies of the proposal. Can we also include 1 single soft copy?
Wait, say it again?
What? 10 copies of the proposal?
10. It says 10 hard copies of the proposal. I mean, if we did soft copy for distribution, that'd be fine too.
Yeah, I can't find what you're looking at, John, I'm sorry.
Number 13.
Number 13.
Last
It's on, yeah.
Yeah, but it's on the next page after 13. You gotta flip it over.
Okay, so we're suggesting that we're
10 copies.
yeah, but we don't need
We
10
didn't get a 10.
hard copies.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's not,
Sorry,
it's not 1983 anymore, unfortunately.
Okay, yeah, because we can make our own.
We have a copy machine, we have email.
Just 10.
So applicants requested to provide 1 hard copy, but that would be,
Hard copy and, you know, have them send a digital copy as well.
so that Nancy can send it to them.
Yeah. That way Nancy doesn't have to worry about copying them all and scanning them and all that stuff. Just have them send soft copy and they can
Is that
email
all
them.
right, Nancy?
So we're asking to a hard copy?
Yes.
A hard copy and a soft copy, meaning digital. So that way the clerk doesn't have to make photocopies and.
Well, do we need, well, in that case, I mean, do we need a hard copy? Could somebody not simply submit the whole?
I'd prefer
thing?
all electronic, but we need to have a way to stamp it in.
Yes.
Yeah, Nancy's given us the look.
You don't bid open these, but you do open them.
Right,
and
so it's
stuff
1
like
hard
that, so you're gonna
copy.
need a
Okay.
hard copy.
Yeah, a hard copy, and that way you can stamp it
They
in,
have to
so.
be stamped and everything too, that they can, yeah.
So one hard copy and 1 electronic copy?
Sometimes the stuff we don't.
In addition, under number 8, the budgeted amount.
It is though, because all they send a hard copy.
28,000. I'm not sure if that's
Excuse me?
Number
We
eight.
can't hear you.
Number 8.
Nancy and I are sharing a microphone tonight. Under number 8, I believe the budgeted services for land use services is absent. I think it's 28,000, although it may have been increased to 30 under the
Well,
new
that
budget.
Yeah.
So we have a budget here.
I do have a budget here.
Well, they did for,
Well, we usually don't.
There is a.
Yeah, there is. Jesus, I wish I would.
Legal and zoning issues, $30,000 is, the budget's $30,000.
We can add that.
So we can add that. Actually, and the town solicitor budget is.
It's higher.
It's actually in this year's budget, $100,000.
So that has to be changed to the salary to 100.
You want to change it to 100?
That's what it's budgeted for.
Yeah, I'll fill in the budget.
Okay.
Madam President?
Obviously, on the record, we'd like
Yes.
whoever responds to be less than 100,000.
Well, yes.
Yeah, but
That's-
Considering since this just went out to RFP in, I don't know, July or August, should I send any kind of memo to those that sent their resumes at that time and tell them that council is
we can do
considering?
that, though. We can give a heads up to certain firms and not others. Okay.
I mean, we could certainly reach out, we still have their applications.
Yeah.
We do.
So we could
can
ask
reach
them
out.
if they would like.
If
to
they
re-
feel
would like
they
to
should
be-
make some indication, some
Yeah.
expression of.
Would they like to be reconsidered, and would they like
Or resubmit.
us to use their prior applications? If not, they can submit new ones according to the deadline like everybody else, right? Does anybody else have any other comments on the RFP?
What's the timing of this? When does it go out?
Go on.
This says November 15th. I don't know.
Can we get it out
if you want
sooner?
it that short. I'll have to put it in, depends, I usually put it in Lawyers Weekly and Providence Journal.
Wow.
When do you think is a reasonable
month.
time to get this advertised and get applications back?
I mean, I can get it out advertised this week, because I'm not putting in this kind of time.
Right, so then.
Get it advertised this
It'll
week.
be before November 1st.
So I would say,
So 2
yeah,
weeks.
the next meeting we have is until, we have it on the 12th and the 28th. So you could extend that date if you were hoping for the 28th. You could extend that date till at least the 21st. Let me see, I don't have,
Well, we'll have to have special meetings anyway for interviews and all of that. So
we're going to have it on the 25th. You could make it the 21st. It gives it another week.
Okay.
The 21st? Does that give you time to get it in Lawyers Weekly?
Try, I have a couple of others, yeah. I mean, I'll try my best to get it in tomorrow.
I'm sure if you reached out to the Bar Association, they could advertise it on their website. I mean, given that's one of our requirements.
So, does anybody else have any other comments on the RFP? Is everybody okay with the date that we're giving Nancy for the RFP?
Yes.
Okay. And is it also clear from this, and I think that this is, that someone may apply for one or both? In other words, is it clear in this RFP that someone might apply for both the solicitor services and the land use? Or someone may choose to apply for those separately?
Last time, we did have
We did.
applicants who did for separate.
So
Yep.
I actually don't think that's clear from this form.
Yeah,
yeah,
I don't think it's clear either.
So you could change.
I read it as you had to have the lead attorney would be our solicitor, and then he may subcontract out or have somebody else from his firm
Well, wouldn't we have to?
or her firm.
The heading would be
well, could we add it,
to the heading.
Could we add a sentence add a sentence at the beginning that made it clear that should someone choose to apply only for land use, or
Why don't we make it an add alt?
You should make it clear in the duties description as well as in the top line description.
Okay, so,
But most municipalities will advertise for a solicitor and they'll advertise for a land use solicitor. I think you can put them in the same advertisement, say solicitor to cover, municipal services and/or land use services.
well, we could put
That
it
could
in the
save the
very
cost.
first sentence. The township is requesting proposal, serve as a town solicitor.
And/or
And/or.
solicitor for land use boards.
Yes.
And then just make sure that the duties description also makes clear that it could be an attorney seeking to serve either or both
The
roles.
town solicitor is meant to fill.
You should be here.
That's all.
You should be here.
So that would be put in the duties.
I highlighted what I was interested in.
I mean, rather than us trying to wordsmith this right now, knowing that we want, could Nancy and Jan, and maybe with Matt's help, just get that paragraph changed as quickly as possible to get it out? In that case, unless there's anything else, do I have a motion to advertise this RFP for the town solicitor and/or land use
So moved.
services?
So moved.
With changes, with
With the-
discuss.
For the changes.
With the changes that
Amendments.
we discussed, yes.
That we just discussed?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any other comment?
I did.
All in favor?
We do opposed.
Oh, was there some, sorry, I missed it. Was someone
No.
opposed?
Were you guys voting? I don't. Oh, okay. I didn't see your hands go for anything.
I don't know, is there a record limit for how high?
Yeah, I think there is.
Visible. That's all that matters.
Okay. Next, Councilor DiMadeira's appointment of council liaisons and representative for negotiations.
As everyone knows, we are all appointed to different boards and commissions because of the because that Justin and Rob are no longer here. We do have some vacancies. If anyone is interested in any of these, also, if the new councilors are interested in something that we are all on, we may very easily give it up to you. So, yeah. I will do budget committee if no one else would like to. I've done that in the past, and I'm comfortable with that if that's okay with
Can't
everybody.
we have two?
We can definitely have two to each one. So if anyone else wants to join me,
Counselor, I will join you.
Dee Medeiros and Edwards. I have
Ooh, just-
Nancy has the Arts Commission. Councilor Driggs has the Arts Commission. Canvassing Authority is Councilor Dee Medeiros, myself. Cemetery is Councilor Perry. Conservation is Councilor Hilton. We need someone for the Economic Development Committee. Anyone interested?
Yeah, I would like to sign up for that.
Harbor and Coastal is Nancy Driggs. Historical Cemetery Commission, Councilor Cook. Historical, Donna has all the historicals. Historical Preservation Advisory Board, Councilor Cook. We need someone for the Housing Authority. Anyone interested?
Yeah, I'll sign up for that.
Okay. Thanks, Steve.
Why are you laughing?
Nothing, that's not a bad one. Juvenile Hearing Board, Councilor Driggs. Landfill Recycling, Councilor Hilton.
Madam President,
Yes.
Yes, John?
I would love, as you know, based on my affinity for the
I know trash is
landfill.
your thing. Okay. It is. You like that.
I've been going to the landfill since I was like 2.
Okay.
So if I can join you.
Quiet there recently, John.
Yeah, that's a big one. Library is Councilor Dee Medeiros and Cook. Newport County Chamber of Commerce. Anyone interested in that one?
I'll jump on that, I guess.
Open Space is Councilor Hilton. Personnel Board is Councilor Dee Medeiros and Cook. If anyone wants to join us with...
Madam President, might I just add that since there's discussion down the end of the table, I am not on the board for the Newport County Chamber of Commerce.
Anymore.
So I want to make that explicitly clear to everyone who's listening.
The Planning Board is Councillor Hilton. Police pension, I assume Councillor Edwards wants that. since
Yes,
he
I would
did
love
such a
to.
good job the last time he was doing it, and he understands it the best out of everybody. Recreation, Councillor Perry. School Committee, Councillor D. Maderas. Tax Assessor and Board
I'd be
of...
willing to go on the school committee one time.
With me? Okay. Tax Assessor, Board of Review. Anyone interested?
I've got 4 already.
Sign me up. Why are you laughing?
No, that one's an all right one. Tree Commission. If no one wants that.
You know, I'm interested in trees too.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
I like tree houses.
So both of you?
Yeah, I'll do
Let's do it.
Perry
It'll be
and
fun.
Edwards.
We can learn all about apple trees and stuff.
Zoning Board of Review, Councillor Hilton. And then the negotiations, Justin was on both.
Hang on before we get to that.
Something else?
Is there anybody else who either has a board or commission that they, for some reason, don't think is up their alley, or would like to be added to another one of these that only has one? Just in case, offering to anybody who wants to.
Oh, no.
Yes, Madam President. I'd like to be added to Harbor and Coastal, if Ms. Driggs will have me.
I'm sure she
Okay.
will.
We can do that. Anybody else want to be added to anything?
As long as you got me down for landfill.
And just so Steve knows, you're not expected to attend every single one of these meetings.
No, but if
There
you
to
don't
be
attend
there.
4 in a row, you boot it out.
And
This
basically,
fall.
it's a go-to person for these commissions. So if they have a very simple question that they just want to ask one counselor, or if they think it should come to the whole bunch, they will call you and ask you your opinion and see what you advise. And I try to go to a meeting once in a while, but, you know, with our schedule, it's kind of difficult, so.
And Counselor Perry is the enforcer.
Usually if they need something, they will call.
So we have that sorted out. Do we need a motion to?
Did you say negotiations?
Yeah, well,
We
I'm
don't-
going to talk about
I don't
negotiations.
think we need
I
a
thought there was
negotiation
something
to
on
add
the
people
list.
as
I didn't
liaisons.
have that on the list.
Okay,
All right.
Councilor DiMaderos back.
So, Councilor Katz was on both the, which ones are we doing? Council 19,
Police
Council?
and fire, he was on police and fire.
No, but those are all done. So it'd be the Teamsters and ASME. So
I
he
was also on the
Yes,
Teamsters.
you were in it. I was
And
going to ask you that.
just to
because-
clarify, I would like to step down, and the reason I'm doing that, just so everybody understands, is that we were at a Councillor Katz, when he was on the town council, was incredibly helpful with all these negotiations. I don't know if people are aware of it, but in the police and fire, he came up with this spreadsheet, that Excel sheet that tracked any change that was made in any of the negotiations, that you could just plug that change in and it would change all the numbers. You could immediately see the effect of it. We were just at the point of getting to that with the Teamsters. I do not know how to do it. I think it would be very important. And so I would like, and because we're not going to have that expertise, I would like to step down. So whoever you want to appoint for Teamsters is.
All right, so since I've been on the council, I've done a lot of the negotiations. I've been the rep, and I was very involved with the police and fire before November. I am willing to do both. As far as the numbers plugging in, I remember that Tim used to do a lot of that in the past, and the treasurer is very helpful with that also. So I am willing to do both, and would love if another council would like to join me.
Madam President, I would be happy to assist Councilor DiMaderas, and perhaps Councilor Driggs can ask former Councilor Katz to share his proprietary spreadsheet with us.
We already have done that.
That would be helpful.
But Donna, you're on one of them now, correct?
No.
She resigned. And keep in mind, the chief negotiator is the town administrator and the lawyer. and Tim Cavassa does a lot of the negotiations. We're basically there to be a representative of the town council.
Just to clarify, though, I can tell you that Tim Cavassa was very, very impressed with what Justin came up with, and it was new to him, too.
The one thing I need to add is that Tim has thus far not participated in the Teamsters negotiations, but we now would have to ask him.
Yes.
And he's ready to take over in terms of the numbers and the spreadsheets for ASME as well. And Mr. Katz has agreed to provide the spreadsheets that he had been working on so far, so.
So let me get this, let me make this clear. Denise and John are gonna do.
Both, John?
Well,
Yeah, I'll back you up. I mean-
Is there somebody else who would like to, just so other people have the opportunity, is anybody else interested in being the co on one of these?
You can actually have 3, really, if somebody wants to just come and observe, as long as there's not.
I just want to
But I mean, it's difficult, only one person should do this.
But I just want to make sure, is there anybody else that would like to have the experience of sitting on a negotiating team?
Yeah, sign me up for it, please.
Yes, okay. So in that case, why don't, John, why don't you work with Denise on one, and then Counselor Clark
Yeah.
can do it on the other, and then, you know.
All right.
You two can decide
which one you want.
And fight an arm wrestle, see which one you want.
Well, rock, paper, scissors.
Madam President, can we just get that locked down for
Yeah.
the record?
Okay, so, which one do you want, John?
Your call, Counselor.
I was looking at police pension board. Is that
No,
what?
we're talking about negotiations.
Oh,
So
neg-
you asked me, or
Or the Teamsters.
All right.
Teamsters. Either one would give you the experience
Yeah.
of seeing what it's like.
I'll take Teamsters.
Sounds good.
Good.
AFSCME it is for me. One more question for the administrator. Would you be able to forward that spreadsheet to me? Thank you.
Okay.
Love to take a look at it.
Donna, you have something?
I just want to make note that the Teamsters and the ASME are under the umbrella of the AFL-CIO. During the recall, they sent out.
Madam President.
And backed up.
Donna, I'm.
No, you have influence of the AFL-CIO that helped to
Donna.
recall negotiations. They'll be
Donna,
on the
you're
negotiations
Donna,
team.
you're
to
out
replace
of order.
counselors.
You're
I
out
want everyone
of-
to know
you're out of order,
that
Donna.
they were backed by the
Okay, we're gonna
union
take a
and they're now
recess
going to
till
sit at the
everybody's
table for the
gonna-
taxpayers.
I have no affiliation with either union, to tell you the truth. I
is
didn't
what it
even
is.
speak
It's
to either
true.
union, so.
No one, I will not speak for any other counselor.
What do you owe the
I
union
have-
now?
I have no affiliation and no indebtedness and no anything
They
to
hope to recall
any.
people with
That has
postcards.
nothing
To do
with us. Whatever, the unions are independent entities. I do not have control over them.
Oh, you
Okay.
don't?
We're taking a 10-minute recess so everybody can conduct themselves. I'd like to say something, and I hope that I only have to say this once. The purpose of town council meetings is to conduct the people's business. It is not a political event for people to air their own issues around politics in this town. Nor is it the appropriate place for any counselor to accuse any other counselors of nefarious doing, particularly unless they have absolutely irrefutable evidence to back that up. As far as the results of the previous election, that was decided by the voters of Tiverton. It was an open election, as is all and every person, entity, group who has the right of free speech in this country is entitled to participate in whatever way they choose. And to accuse fellow council members of somehow being beholden to special interests because whoever decided to participate in this election in whatever way they chose to do so in any legal manner allowed is simply unacceptable. We are here to work on the problems of the citizens of Tiverton, not to turn this into a political argument. If you want to have a political argument with someone, that's fine, but it can't happen on council time in this room. And if it continues, the next time, I will ask anyone who is out of order and refuses to yield when they are out of order to be removed from the room by the town sergeant, and that is my authority as president. So I would like to continue this, but I do not want to continue this and have any more false accusations made against any other councilors, or to discuss anybody's particular feelings about the election results. Those results were decided by the citizens of Tiverton in an election that was held according to all legal requirements.
There was nothing legal about it. And you're-
Mrs.
and
Mrs.
you're
Cook?
out- and all you do is use that, and everything was about, oh, we interfered with
Mrs.
free
Cook,
speech.
you are out of order.
You're out.
You are out of order.
You shut everybody down, and that was. why
This
you
is
didn't
not
call two
the
people.
people's business, and if there are any more comments,
It is the people's business.
Would you like to leave the table, Mrs. Cook?
When you accused the two people and said lies, that was okay to do it here?
Mrs. Cook, you are.
You did it night after night that we were here.
That's simply not true. I am warning you.
Oh, yes, it is.
I am warning you that if this does not stop, you are going to have to leave the table. You are out of order. This is not
Can't
on
make
the.
me leave the table.
This is
People
not-
voted for me, and I have a
this
right
is-
to speak.
Oh, under Robert's rules, yes. Mr. Fabish?
Under Robert's rules, comment proceeds through the chair.
Are we clear?
Perfectly clear. No free speech.
We were discussing the union negotiating team. Have we resolved that? That it will be
Believe so,
Yes.
yeah.
Councilors Edwards, Clark, and DiMedeiros. The next item on the agenda is an agenda request under the name of Councilor DiMedeiros regarding the town council policy regarding the release of executive session records.
All right. I'm going to turn this over to Nancy soon, but first of all, and I don't know if this is out of topic, but last time it was said that Nancy could not put something on the agenda, but according to governance, she can take anything off the agenda without the permission of the council. So it really doesn't make a lot of sense that Nancy cannot put things on the agenda. And past practice is Nancy has always put things on the agenda that concern the clerk's office, that concerned elections, and it was never argued against before. So when we do look at the governance policy, I'd like to review that policy, because if you really look at it, certain people aren't allowed to put things on the agenda, which they have in the past, such as the administrator and also department heads often put things on the agenda when they have concerns, or they have bids, or they have things. So I think we need to look at that, John, when we eventually, because I know you want to put that on
Absolutely.
the agenda, that we need to look at that part. I also would like to say, yes, I did vote for this policy, but during the discussion, it was very clear that we all had a lot of concerns. And that in order for this to work, there was a lot of work that needed to be done and a lot of research to be done. And especially surrounding the tapes, because we really hadn't figured out a way that we were going to release the tapes and the amount of hours it would take to do this, which comes to the town clerk's office has an abundance of work already. Her assistant was not hired to do this. Her assistant was hired way before this all came about. And this is going to take endless hours to go through this correctly. And it's going to take a lot of legal services to go through this correctly, too. As someone who participated in most of these executive sessions, there are certain subjects that this council and every council in Rhode Island is allowed to put in executive session for multiple reasons. And a lot of people come to us with the knowledge that this will not leave that back room, the decision in that back room is always made public in open session. But a lot of the discussion, the people back there with us do not want it released. And that could be business matters. Personnel matters is a huge one. And I think most of this is going to take a lot of redacting and a lot of looking at. Also, if some of this is released that shouldn't have been released, the lawsuits will be tremendous. And I'm not saying that if it's done properly, and we discussed this the last time, if it's done properly, it could get done. But the Attorney General is also given no guidelines to release executive session also. So there's no guidelines from them, and it's not required by the attorney, and we still have to watch out of the APRA and what APRA says that we can go in there and discuss and not release, and also the state laws that surround this. Now, in light of the solicitor resigning, and we will be getting another solicitor, I think it's very unfair to a new solicitor coming into town that we enact a policy that has a lot of problems. I think he needs to weigh in on this, because let's face it, if this goes to court, it will be a different attorney representing us. And I think that before any of this policy is put through, a new attorney needs to weigh in on this, because he will be the one defending this.
Madam President? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay. You know, do I want to be open and transparent? Yes, I do, but I want to follow laws. And I know people in the audience are shaking their head. A closed subject does not mean that can still be released. It depends on what the subject is. And we have personnel matters where we're in there listening to what our personnel is accused of, and then it ends up that we decide it's not true. That employee should not have that on his record that he was accused of that. And I think that is one of my problems with this personnel matters, right, and that's against the law. And people need to understand that, because there's a lot of conversation surrounding this on Facebook and in letters to the editors. We go into executive session because we are required to go into executive session on certain topics, and we are required not to release that information. It's not that we want to do it, it's that the state law, APRA laws state that. But I think my major concern right now with all of this is we have a new lawyer coming on board who's going to have to defend this policy, and I really do think that he needs to weigh in on it before we make any final decisions. I'll turn if it's okay with Trish.
Actually, since this was originally Madam Clerk's item that she attempted to put on the agenda last week, I'd like to let Madam Clerk have the floor first and then the rest of the council.
So I am at the exact point I was when this policy was originally brought forward. It's not a corrective policy. It's not an illegal policy. The problem I have with this, and I've stated it endlessly, executive session minutes are not indexed. It's not like your open council meetings where we have these big council books in the back. You can look under indexes. You can go all the way back to the early 1900s, 1800s, and you can find information that way. Executive session minutes have never been indexed. What I had offered to do and what I have started to do is to work on indexing. It means going back through the 390-some sets of executive session minutes that I have taken. I can't even tell you the clerks before me took, but I can tell you the 390-some that I took. I have started to go back to each executive session and start to index at least the topic. Because if you ask me for a topic to say that it is closed or not, I wouldn't even know. I'd have to look at 390 sets of minutes every single time somebody asks for them. So I started that process, and I had explained to the solicitor, Mr. Cicione, that that's what I was doing. And he seemed to be responsive to it. Well, when you can get there. I can't work on it all the time. I have other things that I work on. And this policy states that going back, the solicitor would go with this. I have said clearly from the beginning, I would not be the person to determine something to be closed or not. The council sealed those minutes. It's the council's responsibility to unseal minutes. I just cannot do what this policy is asking me to do. The tapes, I gave 3 of them. We said, let's pilot it. I gave 3 of them to the attorney. He came back and told you himself they're inaudible in most cases. Those were used only as an aid for me to type the minutes. I also look back at what I have as draft minutes before being approved. Every set of minutes that is signed and approved is in a sealed envelope. That's what the council orders, that's what is done. So I have copies of the drafts as I was doing them, but it's just like a pad, which records destruction allows you, once you accept the minutes, for me to just get rid of this. So they're not complete unless I go open envelopes. Can it be done over years and time? Probably, but it's an awful lot of work. Also, I was under the impression, and it was repeatedly said, and if you look at the meeting back in August when this got voted on, you're going to hear it repeatedly said, oh, you know, when the Attorney General's going to be lenient with you, and, you know, we're going to partner with them, and this is going to be a pilot for the state of Rhode Island. Well, I called the Attorney General because I had concerns that they would be lenient with Nancy Mello. And why would they be lenient with her? They're the Attorney General's office. So I called them. And I had already said at open meetings that I had gone to the summit, I had spoke to some of the representatives there from the Attorney General office. They had told me they didn't know what they would be doing with these tapes, and there was no specific guidelines to this yet. I relayed that to this council. I never held anything back from this council on these. I told you the amount of work it would be. I pleaded my case all the way through that it was almost going to be impossible to get done. So when it came across that, okay, so the council president and the solicitor went to talk to the Attorney General. Of course we want transparency. Of course the Attorney General's office wants transparency. But the regulations are not there for us. So it was said, oh, don't worry about it. You're going to be, you know, they're going to be lenient with us. They'll this, that, and the other. More than likely, they're going to be lenient with us. Nobody. So I called the Attorney General's office to find out why they would be lenient with me. And if, in fact, that was so. And I got a written response from the Attorney General's office stating clearly they're not going to be lenient with me. They adhere to what the statutes are. They adhere to the law. So this whole idea of, oh, well, as long as you're trying, that is not so. And I've got it in writing that it's not so. I did ask, you know, I don't like this responsibility on me because I don't like the liability of what could happen. Is there liability? Is there legal liability? Well, the Attorney General's office is not going to answer that. I did not intend it to get an answer like that. I asked only, would there be leniency? Yes, they said they discussed a potential policy, which is fine. Any problem with legality would have to be referred to the solicitor. That's understandable. It's, you know, it's basic. But they then made sure they put in there that they want me to know. They're not going to be lenient with me because it's a task that can't be handled. If anything, they cannot judge anything before it gets there, but when it gets there, If I have violated by not being able to respond to these voluminous APRA requests that go back to, I don't even know why anybody would want to go back that far, but that go back to the 2000s. This is putting me in a difficult place for what the councils have gone into executive session for. I don't vote for it. I don't even talk in the executive sessions, very rarely unless I'm asked. Do I talk in executive sessions? Although plenty of councils have said, why don't you say this? And I've responded, it's not my place. So I am not protecting anything. I'm telling you, there is a system there that needs more work. And that's where I stand with it.
Madam President, can I? So a couple of things I really want to correct. We're talking about the policy that we adopted on August 26th. And the policy clearly states the goal is transparency and open government and to increase the public's access to information while conforming with applicable law and balancing against protecting town interests and administrative workload. It also is very, very clear that the efforts of the town council, of the town administrator in dealing with this request is, where is it? Sorry, I had the, it's subject to time and, I want to find the exact wording. It's a time and resources. Let's see. The town solicitor, for matters which concluded before the adoption of this policy, the town solicitor and town clerk shall work backwards in time for release in the ordinary course of business as time and resources permit. Nobody's asking an immense effort to get everything done in 2 weeks or something. Secondly, Denise DiMedeiros was indicating about how you determine when things conclude. That's governed by Rhode Island law. And there are certain categories that require the town council go into executive session. Collective bargaining, job performance, character or health of an employee, investigations, property, prospective business. For each of those categories, the conclusion is there's an indication of when that matter is determined concluded, and that's under state law. So there is guidance. It's not subject to interpretation. And
Councilor Joyce, can you
there was
cite the state
something-
law, please?
Excuse me, let me finish, please.
You have it? Okay.
And then
Constitutions are not state law.
I'd
Rhode
like to.
Island 4246 5A1.
That's the reason to go into
Right,
executive.
right.
These were just, you chose that to be, that's a description someone put there.
That's correct,
Say
of
what
the
it is.
things
That's
that
not
what
a
it
state
is.
law.
No, it's a category that requires going into executive session.
Right,
But
but not.
when
So-
we find them concluded,
Okay.
there's no
Well,
regulations.
all I'm saying is this is
Got it
for
right here.
transparency. Everybody also audio was specifically excluded pending further investigation. So we're not looking, this policy does not yet deal with audio. It's just minutes. And I don't frankly understand what you mean by they're not indexed. When we come out as a town council, I'm just not understanding. When we come out and we're given that sealed envelope of the minutes from executive session, don't you have a same copy of those minutes, correct?
I typed the minutes, so I have them, but what you get is a set of minutes that might have 3 different topics on it.
Correct.
And for years, what it stated was litigation. It
Correct.
didn't say litigation, Town versus John Smith. It just said litigation. I have to go back in those minutes and start to index litigation, John Smith, litigation, Town
But
of
at some
Oroville
point,
versus
that's going to
Townsend.
have to happen. Is that
I'm
not
doing it,
correct?
Nancy.
No, I understand. But as a matter of fact, people, when a matter is concluded, the public is entitled to those documents. So at some point, somehow, we have to figure out a way to make that happen so that the public can have access to past actions. And
I
that's all this
absolutely
policy.
agree with you there, Councilor Driggs. The problem is, I can't even get another community who does that. So I've started a process that would at least, but do you realize how many different items under litigation, under negotiations, under everything?
So
what I
let me
started
make-
on was open space purchases, thinking that is concluded. We bought the property, that's concluded.
Yeah.
But it's not like I can just look through 10 sets of minutes and find it. I'm going to go through 390 sets of minutes.
You've had people offered to volunteer, and I know there could be an issue with it because until they're unsealed. But for instance, a town council member could help, correct? Go through and look at the categories?
I will say this. I have never, in my 15 years as being clerk, had a council member ask for any records prior, except for the last council. I had a member of the council ask me. I do not, those minutes are sealed by a council, and unless a council unseals them. However, I received a memo from Solicitor Cicione who said, no, you can give council members.
That was my
they can look.
understanding.
I have never had that, but as I can recall, twice. One very important one that in executive session it was said, please distribute that. And one other time when Council Katz asked for a prior.
I guess my
council meeting.
question is, I am a town council member now, and I would be absolutely willing to help volunteer going through past records to indicate what category they referred to, if that's the help you need.
Well, I consider those confidential, and I don't go in until council tells me to.
Well, I'll
But
leave
that's
it
a
up
council
to the-
directive to me, then that's what'll be done.
Madam President, I just have a question for the solicitor. So, Mr. Solicitor, hypothetically speaking, right, we obviously know that we're here because we have this council policy that was enacted back in August, and, now here we are with an APRA request for the clerk. Hypothetically speaking, if this council were to rescind or repeal this existing policy tonight, what position does that put us in relative to this APRA request, given the immense amount of workload that the clerk is faced with?
So your question actually raises a number of points, Counselor. Fundamentally, the question is, are the records requested in an APRA request public records or not public records? And to understand that analysis, first, of course, you would look to state law. Are they sealed? Are they not sealed, right? If they were not sealed, then they'd obviously be subject to any APRA request that was made. Once it's been determined that they're subject to an exception, then you need to go through essentially the question of whether this, and they were sealed. You have to go through the question of whether the policy that was adopted by this body, is self-effectuating, and whether all the requirements of that policy were satisfied prior to the request being made, such that the records are subject to public disclosure. And let me also note that even if you satisfy that requirement and they then are subject to public disclosure, there's another layer of analysis that state law would impose, which is whether any of the records deal with issues where individuals are entitled to privacy, right? Because once it's a public record, then you have to analyze whether an individual's interest in privacy outweighs the public interest in obtaining the record, because of the nature of the exceptions that are used when this body goes into executive session. It's certainly possible that a court would find that a number of those interests are in fact outweighed. The individual's interest in privacy does in fact outweigh the interest in public disclosure. There's a case involving the Providence Journal relatively recently where that was essentially the determination that was made. But returning to the policy, the policy sets out a number of objectives. It certainly says that the intent is to make the records released and available, but it also was made, I checked in preparation for this meeting, I checked the minutes that were produced from both of those. So first of all, it's important to understand that this policy was adopted subject to the conversation and the amendments that were made during those conversations. Beyond that, the policy itself specifies that, that the release be after and subject to an administrative review period on a rolling basis. And so because of that, to the extent that this body's determination is that they do not believe those records are public, I would recommend that you make an explicit finding that Section 5 of the policy that was adopted on August 26th has not yet been satisfied.
That's the administrative review period?
That's the administrative review period. And the procedure generally, right? The procedure that allows the clerk and the solicitor to go through and perform that analysis. But I would suggest that at most, and I think there's a question in light of the reservation relative to audio, whether the policy ever even began to run. But at most, the administrative review period clearly has not run. The important point relative to the audio, and it was specifically reserved in the policy, is that this board cannot release minutes without releasing the audio. Rhode Island General Laws 38-2-3G specifically requires that public bodies possessed of records release those records in whatever form they have them in, subject to the requester's instruction. So if you have records in audio form and in typed minutes, if the requester asks for them or asks for all records of a particular incident or event, then the body has to produce all of them. It cannot hold back one and not the other.
Which is fine when we're in open session because the camera's right there and it's live on YouTube and we have these wonderful microphones that not all of us sometimes like to use. Right, okay. So essentially what I'm hearing from you then is that if this council finds that we haven't satisfied the requirements of this policy, we are in a position where we could rescind or repeal the policy, and it would not impact us negatively relative to this open APRA request that came in.
I think that that's an area where there can be reasonable legal disagreement, but that is the best legal interpretation.
I'm satisfied. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Some of my thoughts on this subject. Well, first of all, there's two major issues here, and we've kind of put the cart before the horse in my mind. The first issue should be, are we going to rescind this, if that's the right word? You know, the last council voted this in, and now I think, based on the wording here, well, the wording specifically is reconsider or suspend, which I think means to reverse it.
Reconsider.
And I think we need to get over that hurdle first. And then the second hurdle is if we decide to uphold the previous decision, the next hurdle is to figure out how we're going to do it. We've spent a lot of time talking about how we're going to do it and what the challenges are, and I hear you, Nancy. It's a huge project, but that should not drive the decision as to whether we're going to uphold our previous decision or reverse it. So I think we need to address that first and keep these two issues separate.
Madam Clerk, just to piggyback on that comment, I just want to make clear that neither the Attorney General's office nor, and going back to something that Nancy said, that the clerk said quickly, the Attorney General's office has taken expressly the position that that unsealing minutes is unprovided for in state law, and that there is no guidance, either affirmative or negative. They simply refuse to offer guidance on that question. And I checked briefly the reported cases, and I could find no reported cases on that question either. On the question of moving forward or not, I think in either case, some language should be addressed to clarify procedurally some things that should happen one way or the other. But I do think the question of retrospective application and prospective application of a policy should almost be handled as two separate issues under this policy.
I think all business done by the town council and any government body belongs to the people. I think sealed minutes may be okay until they're resolved or come under state law such as job performance and whatever else is signified to remain sealed. What the OMA law says is that they have a whole list of items that can be in executive session. But it says you may. It uses the word may. It doesn't say you shall. So it's always up for interpretation as to if you're going to do it in open session or if you're going to do it in closed session. And what I see happening here is more and more is done in closed session to keep the people from the business that they're paying for. And I think it's wrong. I know it's going to be some trouble to go forward. I think it's worth it. I think because it's been done this way for so long that there is a big pile, but I really think it belongs to the people. If it's resolved, anything that lawfully can be unsealed should be unsealed and done in a manner that we'll discover how to do that. It seems like a mountain to do, and I understand that anything new is kind of scary, but I think you still have to put one foot in front of the other and do what's right, because transparency always improves the trust between the government and the people. And it's very important that there's trust. People don't always know what executive session means, but they kind of know it because they use other words for it. And what they use is backroom deals and secret meetings. I think what they're talking about is executive session, because they don't know it's executive, it's called that. They just call it how they see it. So I think to take away the cloak of being secretive, that I think it's a good way to go, and it gains trust. And also, it enables the taxpayer to easily research and hold their government and elected officials accountable for how they spend your money at all levels of government. And I really think it really is important that we go forward with this and try to find a way to satisfy this policy. Thank you.
So in that case, I'm going to weigh in here on this. I will say, I agree with Councilor Cook in that I don't think a lot of people necessarily have a good grasp of what executive session is about and why it's there. And, you know, again, there are laws that govern, and you have to meet the standard in order to go into executive session. And while I do think that as much transparency is a wonderful thing, I also think that sometimes to protect the people's interest, to actually protect the people's interest, you have to go into executive session. You know, if we're selling a piece of property, and anybody who's been in a real estate negotiation knows that there are, you know, if you're the seller, you've maybe got, you know, your bottom line price, right, in your negotiation. You know, if we have a meeting in public and say, well, we're going to sell this piece of land, and well, this is our bottom line, and we disclose that in public session, we don't really have much to negotiate with. You know, there are obviously litigation matters where you don't want to disclose your litigation strategy in public to the opposite side. So the reason for being in there is actually to protect the public interest. And as far as, you know, what happens in executive session, which I think some people have taken the whole conspiracy theory idea to a point of no return. But keep this in mind. In executive session, you've got all 7 counselors. You don't have a subset of counselors. You've got everybody. And not everybody's all on the same page, by the way. You've also got additional witnesses and participants. You have the town administrator. You have the town clerk, who's an elected official. And you have a town solicitor in there. A town solicitor who's a licensed barred attorney in the state of Rhode Island and who's an officer of the court. My experience in executive session is that solicitors, every one of them I've ever been into executive session with, are pretty strict about making sure you stay on the straight and narrow, that you can't discuss anything that's not an executive session topic. They'll tell you, stop that, you're straying off course. They won't let you do that. They're not going to risk their license, a potential malpractice suit, or any of those other things so that you can have some sort of, weird backroom executive session event. It's just not how it works. As far as this policy goes, and for anybody who has any questions about the council's intent on this policy and what we were worried about when we voted for it, and it was a 6-0 vote, I would strongly suggest, if you can stomach it, that you go back and you watch the full audio portion of the August 26th meeting and then the September meeting. Because in that meeting, several things came up that we either addressed because we were fearful they were going to be problems, or we acknowledged we don't know what we're going to do about this. So, first of all, as far as when these potentially unsealed minutes are made available to the public, in the original policy, there was wording in there that gave an APRA request standing against this policy. At that meeting, we voted to strike that, to take it out. And we did it specifically because the scenario was raised, what happens if Nancy gets an APRA request, a voluminous APRA request, and she can't do it. She can't meet it in forget the 10-day deadline, but, it's just a big request. So in order to protect the clerk's office from that, we struck that. We took that language out. The issue of the audio tapes is another huge problem. We can't actually, under the law, implement this policy unless we can make the audio tapes available. At the meeting on the 26th, there was this, as Nancy mentioned, this discussion that somehow the Attorney General's office was going to be lenient with us if we didn't have the audio tapes. That, as it turns out, is not the case, because the law says that we've got to release the audio tapes. How many audio tapes are there, Nancy?
I don't know, not every single meeting has them, but there's a few hundred.
It was,
So-
Madam President, it was reported there were over 600 tapes.
So in order to make these tapes, in order to make these tapes available, first of all, they're on cassette, so they'd have to be digitized somehow. And then even after that, in order to redact anything that has to be redacted that is, is a personnel thing or somebody's health issue or privacy thing or any of these other things, somebody would actually have to sit there and listen to all these hours of tapes and mark the time stamp on it. Redact from a minute 18. I mean, it would just, it's enormously time-consuming project. And we don't have the resources or the bandwidth to do that, not without actually having to hire staff. I mean, first you have to pay for the cost of getting all this stuff digitized, but then Nancy and her staff cannot possibly do this. But we can't make these minutes available without the tapes. The Attorney General said this. So we kicked that can down the road, not only at the 26th meeting, but at the subsequent meeting in September, where we once again tried to say, what do we do about the audio tapes? Now, if the Attorney General's office really wants to help us, they could do what Massachusetts does, because Massachusetts actually does have laws on unsealing executive minutes. They are not silent on it. But But one of the things that they say is that audio recordings of executive sessions whose sole purpose was to be draft material to be used in the creation of the final minutes. Once the final minutes are created, you can destroy the audio recording. But Rhode Island doesn't give us that. The Attorney General just says, you got an audio recording, you've got to release it. So, we were a little bit fearful of this. And the other thing, if you go back and you watch that meeting, at the end of the meeting when we discussed this, and this, watch the tape, for probably the fourth time, because I know I can repeat myself sometimes, I asked yet again exactly the question of the scenario that we have right now. I said, let me clarify this. If we adopt this policy, and tomorrow somebody shows up in Nancy's office with an APRA request where they want 20 different things from 20 different years, is that a valid APRA request? And the answer from Mr. Coulter was no. The answer from the solicitor was no. And the answer from Mr. Katz himself was no. That none of these things are available until they have been through the entire vetting process, which Nancy is telling us she can't get through. I don't know, honestly, if we'll ever have the resources to be able to go backwards. Maybe we could, or maybe if the AG's office comes out with a policy that says the audio tapes can be for draft minutes, and once you get the minutes, if they met us partway on that, maybe we could at least do part of them. But I will say that I agree very much with Councillor DiMedeiros. If we're hiring a new solicitor and somebody's going to be in that chair who's going to have to defend our decision, defend our actions, who's going to guide us through this, I think it's a worthwhile thing to keep seeing if we can't find a solution, even if it only means going forward first and then maybe trying to figure out if we can go backwards. But I do not think that this policy right now is ready to go. The best professional manager and mentor I ever had was an ex-military guy who would forgive you just about any mistake unless you made this one, which is what he referred to as ready, fire, aim. And I feel like we're in a ready, fire, aim situation here. We want to do something good, but we just do not have, we don't have a policy and the pieces in place to be able to do this. So I don't know if the right word for me is rescind or reconsider or what it is, because I do think that once we have a new solicitor, it is worthwhile to try again. So I'm not sure what the right word is, but I would very much like to take the pressure off of the town clerk's office right now so that it's clear that for now, we are staying with the status quo of the way that we have handled this in the past.
Okay. And my final word is just to say that everything you just raised was raised on August 26th, and the vote was 6-0. Perry was absent.
Right.
That is true, but all of these issues that were to be resolved out of that 26th meeting are, as of yet, none of them are resolved. We still don't have an answer to any of these. So I would ask the solicitor, if this is something that at some point in the not too distant future we were willing to reconsider or come back to, what would be the right word in a motion?
I think, Madam President, you could accept the motion to suspend. My only concern there is that you should specify that any administrative review period provided for under the rules should be told during that period of suspension. So, for example, if, and again, I think it's uncertain and probably unlikely, given the conversation that took place on August 26th and subsequently. But to the extent that a court or that the Attorney General's office could find that the administrative review period for all of these executive session minutes started on August 26th with the adoption of the policy, and it's the intent of this body at this point to cut that off, that the tolling language would then extend for whatever period of suspension the administrative review period. So if the policy is ultimately suspended for 6 months, then the administrative review period goes from 12 months to 18 months.
Oh, okay. All right, now I get it.
I think it's important to point out, given I think, Madam President, your description of ready, fire, aim, that once this bell is rung, you can't unring it. So we don't want to get to the end of an administrative review period. An administrative burden is unlikely to fall on sympathetic ears, again, either at the Attorney General's office or with a court. So you need to put a halt to it and then restart it when this body feels as though it's ready to restart.
So let me ask one question about adding that. My feeling, again, based on the questions that were asked on the 26th and the answers that were given on the 26th, clearly leads me to believe that, and by the way, I'm going to add one other thing from the meeting at the 26th. At one point, the question was asked, what happens if this doesn't work? What happens if we start down this road and we realize that this doesn't work? Like, we have a problem. And the clear answer from the town solicitor was, and it was very simple, he said, it's the town council policy, just change it at your next meeting. So by adding the language about tolling, are we in any way, shape, or form giving anybody the indication or the acknowledgement that that in effect we agree that that requests that came in prior to this suspension are somehow valid? Because after, again, if you watch that meeting and you hear these questions asked and answered, to me, clearly they're not. So I want to make sure of that.
So what I would do is make the affirmative finding that the criteria under Section 5 were not satisfied. I would include a reservation that to the extent any court or administrative body with authority determines that an administrative review period was started, that it's this council's intent to toll that period until such time as the policy can be readopted or put into effect.
Without an end date, without a month?
Unless this council determines that there should be an end date.
Oh, okay.
Madam President, I have one question on that. So I think the crux of our earlier discussion is that the policy itself would automatically unseal these minutes, right? That we wouldn't have to vote to unseal specific meeting minutes, right? That's the assumption that we're making here.
Yeah.
But since the state has no guidance on this as to how to unseal minutes, how do we know that that's not ultimately what comes out and that a council policy can't preempt whatever the future state law is? My point being is that the state finally gives us guidance and says, yes, you can unseal minutes. You have to, let's say they come out and they say, if you're going to unseal the meeting minutes for October 28th, 2019, you have to raise it in open forum and all the council has to vote. And that's the way that you unseal minutes. Well, our policy just says, hey, we're just going to put them out there and we're going to unseal them. Would we not?
It doesn't.
State law always preempts, right? If it's something that the council is empowered to do, then it's something that the council is empowered to do. If it's something that state law indicates is preempted, then you can't do it. It would have no effect.
So I guess my point being is that without any guidance from the state, right? The council just kind of put together a policy to put out there. You don't even have all the answers as to how we would go about doing this. Wouldn't it make the most sense to rescind the entire policy, get it off the table until such time as there are actually answers from the state?
I think it's a policy determination for the council to make, right? I think before the council right now could be complete repeal and rescind and repeal, could be suspend with the idea that you're going to adopt some policy going forward, and that you want whoever the new solicitor is to have an opportunity to put eyes on that and make recommendations, or it could be to keep the current policy in force. That's a policy determination for yourself.
Let me ask you one more question. What is the path forward for us to take where you believe we are in the least amount of opportunity for a legal challenge? Because I feel like we're going to get sued regardless on this, but
I don't.
You know the guy better than I do, so.
John? We're not having personal
I don't think that that suspending or rescinding is going to make a difference. To
Okay.
the extent that there's legal jeopardy to the town, it already exists. Suspending or rescinding, suspending indicates, I think, to your constituents an intent to adopt some policy going forward, if you can work out language that you all find to be acceptable.
I have another question, which is kind of, the council votes to seal minutes when we come out of executive. Does it require a council vote to unseal minutes?
So again, state law is silent on that point. Arguably, it's actually the town clerk's responsibility to unseal those minutes, in that she's the keeper of the records. That's the position that the town solicitor's office has taken, and it's not a point that I personally have specifically reviewed, but I do know that that's been the position of the town solicitor's office up to this point. And to the extent that an individual is the keeper of the records for any particular governmental body subject to APRA, that is the individual that's responsible for making that determination.
But do you see why I'm asking the question? If it requires a vote to seal the minutes, why doesn't it require a town council vote to unseal the minutes?
And again, state law is silent on that point.
Okay.
The best guidance I can give you is that state law does direct that determination to be made by the keeper of the records. And of course, that's potentially subject to appeal to the town administrator as well.
That's why this would be so much easier if Rhode Island would adopt laws like Massachusetts, because Massachusetts actually in their law says that the body that sealed the minutes has to be the one that unseals the minutes.
No question.
I can't wait to see this play out in court.
Well,
Okay,
I'm hoping it's not going to. In that case, if someone were to make a motion, would the town solicitor like to help craft that motion to include all the language that you just referenced?
Yeah, because I've been writing it down, but you've been all over the place a little bit, only because we've been asking questions all over the place.
Can I ask what the motion is that you're asking his help to draft?
To suspend.
Not to rescind.
Well, the motion that I would like to make is to rescind, but I don't want to,
Well, you need to decide.
I would
But,
second that.
but I do want you to make sure that we're cleared at the end of it, so that there's not, I don't want to increase it for 6 months. I want to make that endless.
Indefinitely.
Right now, until we reconsider this, until a new solicitor, and I'm not saying get rid of this completely, that's why I'm suspending it. When a new solicitor comes on board, then I really would appreciate him going through this, because like I said, he's the one that's going to have to defend this legally.
Or she?
Or she, I'm sorry, he or she. I keep saying he, but I'm not, he or she.
Or Zim, or Zer.
So that's what that would be my motion, and if someone else wants to do a rescind motion, that's different, but I would like to suspend this until further consideration.
Madam President, could I just state something? No matter what is done with this policy at this point, nothing with this policy prohibits, as I understand you say, the clerk has the ability to unseal the records that the council seals, because she's the keeper of the records, because she takes your minutes. She has that authority. So I don't, so are you saying that there's nothing really to prevent me, though, as I am indexing and I'm coming across things like open space purchases that are pretty simple?
Yes.
There's nothing to prevent me from bringing them before the council and say these all should be open records since the purchase is completed?
Yeah.
I would
So
recommend-
I could
I would recommend that process is one that should take place as part of policy review here, as the council adopts a policy on unsealing.
So I shouldn't do
But
that
again,
till,
you can't unseal, you can't unring the bell. Once a record is deemed public, it's public. So the point is to be sure that you want to unseal that record before you unseal it.
Yes.
And certainly bringing records before and submitting records to the town council is one of the processes that can be used to unseal a record, or to make a record which is otherwise subject to an exception public.
that could be done with or without a policy.
Yes.
Could,
But it shouldn't.
I would advise against it.
Yes. Because we're going forward. Just for the time being. But I think that she can, when you agree that she should still index and look at these things, because once we do put a policy in place, she'll be prepared to come to us with some.
Madam Vice President, that's the council's prerogative, right? If in making this motion, your intent would be to have the town clerk's office continue the process of indexing records, then I think that's inappropriate.
Right.
That's not a legal determination.
Right, at her pace, and something that should be done anyway, no matter what goes on with this. She should have these indexed.
I'm not sure if you wouldn't want the new solicitor to take a look at that part as well.
That part as well, okay. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Make a motion, I'll second you.
So, but if we suspend it, it's almost like, it's not like rescinding it, but at least it's very clear that the council wants to be open and transparent, figure out how we can do this, but have the new solicitor weigh in on this. So that's why I don't want an end date. I don't want to add 6 months to the end. I want to make it indefinite until we can make some
Madam
decisions.
Vice President, if I would just mention, I think we all know that we all want to be transparent and open here. My suggestion to you, because obviously you're going to make a motion, would be to do to rescind this policy until, and it's worthwhile revisiting, but not until the state has given us guidance. And again, it's putting the cart in front of the horse. And I think it's important for us to have open and transparent policies, but doing so now, like, it's just it's gonna open us up to litigation. It's already gonna open us up to litigation. But B, we have no clue what the state's gonna do, if they're ever gonna do anything at all. And we really should wait for the sovereign entity to make the decision. We're just a municipal corporation.
Well, my next question is, if I suspend it, that doesn't stop us from rescinding it in the future if the new attorney comes in and says, this does not make any sense, you shouldn't do it until what John said, that we have guidelines. So if I make the motion to suspend it, that's not preventing in the future to rescind this if a new attorney comes in and says, this is a horrible idea. Is that correct?
Yes,
Why not just rescind it until we have a new attorney?
Yeah.
And then get
Bring it back up for discussion.
that legal advice from him.
Well, anybody can make the motion. Anybody can make a motion to rescind or suspend. I mean,
Madam Clerk, I do have proposed language.
yeah, she's
I do
not the
have-
clerk.
I do have.
She doesn't want to be the
possible
clerk.
proposed language in accordance with what I think Councilman Tiverton is seeking.
Can we wait till there's a motion? I really think the town council needs to decide what direction.
Yeah, I'm asking.
But she hasn't made a motion
I'm asking
yet.
for help. I can do that.
She hasn't made a motion yet.
No, she's asking the solicitor for his advice on how to do this.
The solicitor's advice was fairly specific and fairly drafted in legal language that I think would be helpful for us. So we're asking the solicitor, who I believe understands completely what we're asking for, to help us put together language that's, legally supportable in crafting this motion.
Can I just say, I don't understand what you're asking for. 2 people have asked to rescind, 1 is asked to suspend, and everybody's turning to the solicitor and say, write up what we want. I don't know what you want.
No, I'm asking him to write up a suspension, to give me advice on how to word this legally.
That's what we have a solicitor for. to advise us on what,
If someone
what
else
we
wants
should
to make
do.
a rescind, then,
So I have language that I believe is what Councilor Demideros was asking for.
okay,
Because she specifically asked me for it.
okay.
And I can, after I give you the language, I can explain what I believe it does, and I'm happy to answer any questions from anybody or offer revised language. I would suggest that the language should read, a motion to suspend indefinitely the town council policy entitled Open Government and Release of Executive Session Records, adopted August 26, 2019. Further, that to the extent any court or regulatory agency determines that the administrative review period contained therein has begun to run, and without ceding or agreeing that such period has run, that it's the intent of the council to toll such period until this policy is reenacted or is reinstated. And further, finding that the requirements of Section 5 of said policy have yet to be satisfied.
Okay.
When you say that the requirements in Section 5 have yet to be satisfied, does it need to say for what, or you can, or that no prior minute
For administrative review of previously sealed executive session minutes.
of
Administrative review.
Say that again. Administrative.
For administrative review of previously sealed executive session minutes.
It's under section 5 practices, like right there.
And if it says previously,
This part right here.
if it says previously sealed, I'm just being picky here, since we did take a vote to unseal minutes, right? But we took a vote to unseal the minutes pursuant to the policy. Does that mean that the language that you just gave us is going to cover that?
Yes.
Even though we voted to unseal those minutes, but we voted to unseal them pursuant to the policy, which means that none of them have actually been
unsealed.
through the administrative process and have been unsealed because they haven't been through the process.
Correct. You could also, you could make the finding first and then proceed to make the rest of the finding as to the requirements of Section 5 first. And then proceed to indefinitely suspend. It doesn't matter, but it does add some clarity.
Okay, Nancy, did you write that down? I tried to, but I just,
The findings would be that.
The findings would be the
Section 5 of
first.
Said policy have yet to be satisfied for administrative review of previously sealed executive session
Yes.
minutes. So that would-
And that's not going to be in conflict with that second vote that we took on the 26th.
no, the second vote would be,
No, on the 26th, that was the vote to quote-unquote unseal the minutes in accordance with the policy.
No, because what you're finding is
because
that
what
the
I'm
requirements of
finding
the policy have not
has
yet been
not been met,
satisfied.
Section 5, right?
I'm just double-checking.
Yeah, I know what she's doing. Okay, and then it would be a motion,
Excuse me, I think the second vote did not say in accordance with policy.
It did. actually.
Request vote to unseal closed executive session minutes,
Do you have a
And-
copy that you can
and-
share with us, or?
related records as to closed or completed matters.
No, that's.
That's the vote. It's in the minutes.
I have it somewhere.
No.
The minutes are subject.
The tape is clear.
So the August 26, 2019 meeting agenda minutes under item E1, I'm sorry, E2. Councilor Coulter motioned to approve the request to unseal closed executive session minutes. The matters have concluded, subject to policy and all other applicable law. Release of audio is to be withheld pending further review and study. Councilor Katz seconded.
But it doesn't say subject to the preceding policy. It says subject to policy, which could be any existing policy at the time. So if this gets told or rescinded, it does not specifically refer to the other policy.
If I may, I think if you watch the tape, you actually do have the explanation, because that question was raised. Is that adequate language? And I think in particular, Mr. Coulter went out of his way of saying, we're referring to the policy that we just approved. So I think the record is pretty clear that when it says subject to policy, it's the very policy that was the subject of the preceding vote.
All I know is number 2 is not before us tonight. Number 1 is.
Excuse me?
The number 2 vote, request vote to unseal closed executive minutes is not before us tonight. It was the policy vote that's before us and noticed on the agenda. It hasn't been noticed. We can't.
Nancy,
I don't
could
know
you
where-
speak into the microphone,
Oh,
because I
I'm
can't
sorry.
hear you?
I think we're getting off track, that the item that is before this council tonight is the first vote, request formal approval of town council policy for unsealing and release of closed executive session minutes and related records.
But wouldn't that include everything that was voted regarding that?
There were 2 separate votes.
Yeah, but you raised the second vote, so.
I didn't raise it. I answered in response. They raised it. And I said that was not.
The vote that's currently before the council.
Just vote and call it a day.
The vote that's currently before the council deals with how the council chooses to address the policy. The impact on any records that may or may not have been sealed will be the result of how the council deals with that policy.
For any request that comes in after that policy was enacted. And that policy was enacted Monday night, August 26th. So you're correct. Anything after August 26th that comes in is covered by this policy, correct?
That's not what you said.
Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's, the policy itself is effective, but the question is whether the policy, the requirements of the policy were satisfied
No, and it wasn't.
in order to make certain records available.
I guess what I'm saying, to be clear, the policy was affected as of the night of the town council meeting, August 26th. That's when it was enacted?
Yes, the policy was adopted at that time.
Correct. So anything, requests made prior to that do not fall within that policy?
Correct.
Thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, but but what my argument is we did not do everything we were supposed to make this policy
I agree with
active.
that.
So because of that, any requests, we haven't completed what we needed to do before this policy is really enacted.
I think that's what.
But that's not what Nancy's saying.
I think that's what the finding relative
That
to
is not what
Section 5.
Nancy is saying, though. That is not what Nancy is saying.
And in that case, I think we should also amend the motion to recognize that we have yet to determine disposition of the audio tapes.
Why don't we just rescind it?
Yeah.
Yeah, rescind it. Good question.
Okay, never mind. Are we, anybody more comments here? Does anybody want to say anything else?
Well, I'm starting to think that maybe we should rescind it, only because of what's, suspending it will cause more of a commotion, because if we're suspending it, then it's still in existence. So I make a motion to rescind the policy.
Are you going to use the language?
Do I have to use specific language if I just want to rescind it?
Second.
But I think you should include the whole finding of fact, though.
Okay. Well, that's.
So in that case, can we, would someone
Okay,
restate
so I
the
make a motion to rescind the policy due to the fact that Section 5 has not yet been satisfied.
And make this the explicit finding that Section 5, that the requirements of Section 5 have yet to be satisfied.
Okay.
Relative to.
Audio tape?
No.
Oh.
The entire process, right?
The entire process, okay.
The review of unsealed, of sealed, previously sealed.
Entire process of review of unsealing executive session minutes.
Nancy, do you have that motion? Yes. Could you read it back, please?
Motion to rescind the policy, including the findings of fact, due due to section 5 not having yet been satisfied relative to review of previously sealed executive session minutes.
What does,
That's good.
what does the due to something finding of fact refer to?
Because she started to say due to, but then it's the findings of fact, section 5 has not yet been satisfied relative to review of previously sealed executive session minutes.
That's what I wrote, is,
Sorry, read that back one more
That's
time.
what section 5 has. A motion to rescind the policy.
And to find that.
What?
And to
Including
find.
okay, and to find, I put including finding of fact.
No.
And to find,
That's the requirements of section 5.
5 has not yet been,
requirements of section 5 have yet to be satisfied relative to review of previously sealed executive session minutes.
And we don't need the tolling piece
No,
No, 'cause we
rescinding
were
the policy
saying-
entirely.
then. Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second?
Councilor Perez seconded.
Second. Is there any other comment?
It's very sad to see this happen, so people could know what's going on in government, but doesn't matter how you say it, it's just a closure for people. You can't see anything.
and like you said, that just because it's rescinded, it can always be revisited, and it can be placed back on the agenda when a no lawyer can come in.
It is.
One
Okay.
person at a time, please. Okay, there's a motion and a second. All in favor? Opposed? Next item, progress update on the community comprehensive plan. We have a community comprehensive plan. There was an RFP that went out, and wondering if we could get a status update of what we have done and where we are.
There's no back and forth, right?
I'll start. Not that I really can give you a whole lot of update. It's my understanding that since then, work was done by the solicitor with the help of 2 other attorneys, I believe, to go through the conclusions of the comprehensive plan, and in particular, the implementation plan that's in that comprehensive plan, to make a list and essentially a spreadsheet of things that needed to be addressed, in large part through amendments to current ordinances. To some extent, that has been characterized as cut and paste from the implementation table, and the question is, was more work done than just simply lifting what was in the plan already and put it in an Excel spreadsheet? Certainly, GOC Choney believes that a lot more work was done, and that, in fact, proposals were developed on which amendments and what form those amendments would need to be proposed to the town council so that they could be adopted. I am not sure how much of that actually has been reduced to writing, or up to how far basically those proposals have been developed, i.e., are they in fact ready to be proposed as amendments or not yet? And this probably also relates to a concern about the payment for this work, unless you want to take that as a separate matter.
So, a couple things. I would like to see, could we arrange to see, or at least get a copy in the clerk's office of all the written work that's been done so far?
Madam President, I know that Mr. Chione had intended to provide a binder of the deliverables that were produced in the course of doing this work. He wasn't able to finish that before he had to leave, but he has. I was in contact with him this morning. He indicates that will be delivered to the town the week that he gets back. Attorney Scott is here tonight. She had been working, and I've seen her deliverables, and I've produced some as well. Essentially, the action items that had drafting work that needed to be presented to various boards and commissions were split amongst the three of us. We drafted initial drafts. I think Ms. Chion's in the process of just standardizing those so that they all look relatively similar in terms of presentation. And then the intent would be to deliver those items to the various boards that have authority or jurisdiction, and based on your direction, I think to the planning board as well, and then to move forward with public hearings as is necessary to implement those items.
So my only comment would be this, as the liaison to the planning board, if you look at the original RFP, the draft summary of proposed recommendations were supposed to be reviewed by and in with discussion with the planning board. So I think we need to get these materials to the planning board as soon as possible. They're really sort of the first place to go. But maybe we can discuss this some more when we actually get a chance to see the materials. Anybody else have anything on this?
My question is, how is this being billed to us? Where is it coming out of? Because I have the invoices to date from the solicitor, and I don't understand if any, like the land use and zoning, what we've spent to this point, is that coming out of that account?
I don't know. I don't have anything to do with the billing.
Because I would really like for that to be researched, how much this has cost us to this point, and what line item is this coming out of?
I believe there was a $30,000
Yeah.
budget, and
So it would be
it's coming out of that.
Okay.
And
And I
as you
don't
may
see
know,
any
we did not
invoices.
pay all the invoices in full, and I insisted that that could only be done when we see the deliverables.
Okay, that's what I'm asking. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? The next item is to discuss this scheduling a public hearing on the landfill closure options, including a presentation by PAR to be held at the high school. So it's almost November, and the landfill is going to close in November of 2020. PAR's been in front of us at the council level to give us an idea of what the possible options are and what the costs might be. And just the fact that we are no longer going to be able to bring trash to our own landfill means that if we're going to keep municipal trash pickup, it is going to cost more. There's no way around that. When you factor in where we are with the landfill closure account and the pay-as-you-throw bags, that's another consideration. So I feel really pretty strongly that this is a topic that everybody in the town should be aware of and have the opportunity to participate in the discussion. So my suggestion is that we have a public hearing at the high school, that PAR come and do a short presentation of these are the various options, this is the approximate cost, and then we give the public the opportunity to weigh in, and we do everything we can to advertise this in the paper, put it on social media, maybe even write a letter to the editor, because this is going to be a change to our budget if we decide to, if the citizens decide that they want to keep municipal trash pickup. So that's my suggestion.
Could I ask one question? I actually was away for the meeting where the town council, you all voted on something after after PAR was there. What was the action the town council did take?
stop.
I thought I'm sorry.
Stop doing something to get this going.
But I thought there were several alternatives that were
There were.
open to the town council,
There were.
and you decided on a certain course of action. What was that?
I wasn't here for that one.
We didn't necessarily vote to pick
There was-
one thing in particular.
Well, there
We
was
did-
three options, and we
did-
had-
We did sort of say that the transfer station idea, the $2 million transfer station idea was not probably the best.
Right.
But that we should go forward considering the idea of a recycling center. But we're a long way from having any kind of absolute final decision on that. And we did say clearly then that we wanted public input and we wanted the public to understand exactly what was happening and what the options were. So I think it would be, good for PART to do that and let the public weigh in.
Don't you think this is something we should start doing now because the budget's coming up? We don't want a surprise addition to the budget later on, because the budget we're going to be working on now is for next fiscal year, which is November.
That's, I think, why we need to have a public
Has to be
hearing.
done
That's why,
sooner rather than
that's why I
later.
think, we're going to start doing budget in January. I think we should start scheduling or trying to schedule a public hearing now or within the next month or so.
I was thinking.
My calendar's up, I'm ready.
I was
Okay.
thinking December 2nd.
Veto.
Nancy?
Daughter's
Madam
birthday.
President, Jeannie
Of course it is.
That's hers.
contact the school
December 3rd.
department, and that is a date that's available,
Which date is available?
December 2nd. It's a Monday.
December 2nd.
Well, John won't be able to attend. so-
Nancy,
Well,
it
you
is
might
the
want
first
another one.
birthday
At the high school?
of my only daughter.
How about December 3rd then on a Tuesday?
We'll check to see
check.
which one, and I'll send an email out to the council.
That's enough time to get this advertised, and I think we should all do everything we can to
That's what we're looking at.
make
Yeah.
people aware of this and have as much attendance as we possibly can.
So I, who can make it the 3rd? Is there any conflict with the 3rd?
I
Nope,
can do
I'm
the
good.
3rd.
Currently, no.
No problem.
Let me just double check real quick. Yes, currently, no. No conflicts.
There won't be, 'cause save it.
So,
Talking about December
unless
3rd.
there are any other comments on that, moving right along to item G, which is under my name, but it's really Nancy's item, proposed ordinance amendment to Chapter 22, businesses and scheduling a public hearing. This is really Nancy's item, but given the discussion about Nancy putting things on the agenda, I put it under my name, but I'll turn it over to the clerk.
This item, actually, the administrator in my office has been working with someone on a lien program with the state of Rhode Island to kind of slimline the licensing and make it a little easier for the businesses to be able to come in. This is a proposed ordinance for renewals only, and for renewals of simple licenses, like the vittling licenses, the holiday licenses, and the tobacco. Not any that need public hearing, not any of our liquor licenses or any of that. When they come up for renewal, if you're used to it, it's like backup and pages of agenda for all these licenses, which are all due by December 1st. So what this does, if the council chooses to do this, it kind of puts those renewals only, if they've met what the council calls their legal requirements, if they've met all their requirements, that they could be issued their renewal license right through the clerk's office, somewhat like we do with special events and things. The clerk just issues them. And then I actually added to this is, other community has this, I actually added the number 5 to say that when I do that, if we do that, we would put it on consent agenda, so you would have a list, but you wouldn't have all the backup, because you approved them when they originally came before you. So in other words, if it's a restaurant that you already approved all their licenses, now it's just renewal, their billing license, again and again and again.
Nancy,
Unless complaints or any problems or a council directs.
The one thing I remember, because this came up, I know Rob raised it with you also, and we had a long discussion about this, and I think one of the things that was mentioned, because we were also looking at a way to streamline this, and one of the issues that I raised, I believe, and it still is an issue, is how, and maybe you have an idea, if some legal issue has arisen during the course that and they're looking to be relicensed, the town has the ability to deny them a license. How do we find out what that if there is a legal issue, if.
Well, we discussed this because in this program, and I believe they're going to come before the council in November, I think.
12th.
The building official is also involved in this. So he is now making sure to notify the clerk's office of any violations that he gets that's on there. If in fact, remember, this is not your public hearing ones, so if in fact the state contacted us for something, that would not be placed on this. I also put in there that it would be prior to taking the action, that it would be on your consent agenda. In other words, I wouldn't just issue out a renewal unless first the council got to see that list, which is different than the other community does it, but I thought that was a step that might keep the council into it. Because one of the other initiatives that this lien program is bringing is all this backup you're getting on these licenses, and then you turn around and say, subject to meeting all legal requirements. You really don't need that backup, because if they didn't give the site plan or they didn't give, I wouldn't have put it on for the license to come forward. So we're trying to get the paper out of all this, and I think this is a big part of that November agenda. And you really just run right through them and kind of take it as the list that was presented. But anything with any issue, or if a council said, I want to see from that list on the consent, no, I've heard some issues with this, I'd like to have them come before, then it's simply put on the next agenda for the council to.
Is there a statement that they have to attest to on the relicensing, saying that they are not involved in any?
Well, there will be on what might well become a sort of standard application form that we use for everything, a requirement to certify that they, truthfully fill out all the information.
Yeah, I
The
think
other
that's
thing I
important.
would want to mention is that where this is all going, even though there's still some questions as to whether we are ready to adopt the system that is currently already used by the building office, which is a computer-based system that allows for online applications. And you can imagine how much that can streamline things and make things easier instead of having to come here and stand in line. It also provides that when an application comes in, it automatically goes to everybody who should be reviewing that, including, for example, the police and fire and everybody else. And that should happen, actually, in a way, much better than what we currently do. Currently, we end up with these decisions subject to all legal requirements, which we can only hope that they subsequently meet all those legal requirements. Here, you're more likely to get assurance of that and documentation of that before the license is actually issued. So that's the direction it's going, using the technology that's available and the state initiative that has been developed for that purpose, which I think will make it even more appropriate to take this particular piece out of the process. The lean process is all about looking at an overall process. It started in Japanese manufacturing, and which part of the process really doesn't add any value. It only costs more and it takes more time. And to what extent can we take that out without compromising, what the regulations are all about and everything else? So there's a very interesting process actually to go through that and say, why we're doing this.
Yeah.
Madam President?
My only concern, as I said, and I'll say it again, is that if something has come up and we're just automatically giving them a license and there's not an ability to determine that there is an impediment somewhere, that's my concern.
And everyone that has to do an inspection, that all has to have been met.
Okay.
So if the council's in agreement with it, I'd like to see schedule a public hearing on November 12th, so
Madam-
that we could implement it on our November 25th meeting.
I just want to say that as the newest member of the Tree Commission, or the liaison of the Tree Commission, it sounds like this will save paper, and I think it's worthwhile for us to send this to a public hearing to amend this ordinance, and I would like to move that we do so. Hopefully, the other Tree Commission liaison, Councillor Perry, will second that. Or it's you.
No, I'm not. No, you're not.
Tree Commission, Councillor Perry.
And I just have one other comment. Solicitor Fabish also reviewed this and kind of help wordsmith that last portion on this, too.
The only question that I have, and it relates to what
Yes,
Nancy
it's an
said, is that
document.
we've had in this past this sort of habit of subject to meeting all legal requirements, and sometimes people have met all their legal requirements, but the assumption is, don't worry, they won't get their license till they do. Is there any chance, if this is too much work, the answer is no, but is there any chance in that consent agenda thing, like, I'm assuming that you keep sort of a spreadsheet of these people, right, that has, would it be possible to get something that actually shows, their name and then, an X next to their legal requirements, just so that, I mean, if that's too much
I think it
work-
could be done. On the other end, the other thing here is that, this is a system that is accessible, publicly accessible. You can go in the system, and if you have a question about a particular application, you should be able to see right then and there, what approvals they needed and whether they have gotten them yet.
And this system won't be available for this year's renewals, right? I mean, we won't.
No.
We'll put something there. so
I still think
Or
we
just,
should be
that-
on
or
them.
even a note or something that, we've got these people on the list, but they need to give us this, and don't worry, just so that we don't have people kind of falling through the cracks on not having all their stuff. Okay, in that case, I have a motion and a second.
I just have a question. You said the public hearing will be on November 12th?
It's a Tuesday.
So is that our regular scheduled meeting?
Yep.
Is it
Yes.
Tuesday?
I work in Mass. We don't do some of these holidays. So, and
Veterans
that always
Day.
messes me up.
We
don't. It's, okay.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second. Are there any other comments or questions to send this to public hearing? In that case, all in favor? Okay. Other items, announcements, and comments, the town administrator?
I just wanted to announce that the fire chief let me know that he submitted a grant request, which apparently is going to be successful, for $4,000 to purchase what is called a positive pressure ventilation fan. The two reasons: one is that that's actually a very important piece of equipment that can significantly improve safety for personnel as well as the people who are in an incident, in that it creates positive pressure and pushes heat out of the building, things like that. But I also want to mention it, as this is now becoming a trend that department heads are more and more pursuing alternative ways to supplement the funds that we're getting through the budget appropriations. And so I wanted to give credit to the chief for pursuing that. The last meeting, you had examples of the police chief and the senior citizen director working on a grant, and I think this is something that is really taking hold and we're very actively pursuing. So I wanted to give the chief and the department credit for that.
Town clerk?
Just that, I just wanted to announce that my senior clerk will be retiring in December.
Town solicitor? Town councilors?
Madam President, after you, Councilor Perry.
Yes, I'd like to commend everybody on the trunk or treat event that was held this past Saturday at the middle school. Thank all the people, all the trunkers that attended. Big hooray to the DPW, Tiverton Police Department, Tiverton Fire Department, all the volunteer students, and the school committee for letting us use the middle school, and the recreation committee. And also the custodian, Alan, I don't know his last name, but he was great guy. So I just want to tell everybody it was a very successful event, and we had about 3,000 people.
Yes, I have two. First off, for anybody looking for something fun to do and be a part of a community event, the Tiverton Days Committee is meeting this coming Saturday, 9 a.m. at Little Bear in the back room. And they are looking for more volunteers to help out. Great time to get involved and help put together a great community event.
John, what's the date?
This coming Saturday, 9 a.m., Little Bear, back room. Got it. And then the second would be just to ask the council if at some point in the near future we would be able to reach out to our friends at the Tiverton wastewater department or district and get an update from them as to all the good things that are going on, because I do know that they are about ready to put a bid out there to start moving forward with phase 1, and there's a lot of great stuff happening, so we should make sure that they get some airtime. Thank you.
Anyone else? Any other announcements? Anybody else? Okay. In that case, I need a motion to go into executive session.
I'd like to make a motion to go into closed executive session, potential litigation, 42-46-5A2.
Second.
Yes.
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 Yes?
Yes. Yes.
We're now in executive session.